Loosely themed around the great powers of Europe prior to World War I, the game of diplomacy is infamous for two things: destroying friendships and changing the way players approach other games. Self-published in 1959 by Alan B. Kallhammer, diplomacy uses exceedingly simple and elegant mechanisms to create a highly social game that is won or lost through negotiation and deception. Diplomacy was a pioneer in the play-by-mail space, with players being able to participate in games no matter where they lived. And that's why diplomacy has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Diplomacy is one of 3 games that came out right around the same time. Risk, Tactics 2, which was the predecessor of all the Avalon Hill style war games, and Diplomacy all came out in 1958, 1959. And all obviously are still incredibly impactful decades later. And it's really interesting because Diplomacy has a very specific perspective that it's trying to get across. And, you know, all games and simulation games in particular, the designer needs to take a perspective. And the perspective of Alan Kallhammer, the designer of Diplomacy, is that conflict is ultimately about alliances and about psychology and about how you can convince other people to be your friends. And so to do that, the game itself, rules-wise, it's a little bit complicated, I guess, but there's really stripped down to the basics. There's just 2 types of units, armies and navies. The stroke of genius is really that you have to write down your orders for each of the units, and then you just reveal them simultaneously. And there's very simple ways of resolving battles and things like that. There's no chance at all. If 2 people are trying to move into the same space, if they've got the same power, then they just bounce off each other and nobody touches it. If you're trying to knock somebody else out of a space, you have to have more power than them. And since you only start the game with 3 pieces or 4, you have to have friends. You have to have allies working together in order to do it. And that's where the genius of the game lies. If you have not had a chance to play Diplomacy, it is well worth your time. It has a reputation of destroying friendships because you have to just sometimes absolutely lie to somebody's face and then just turn around and you're going to write something different down on your paper.
Not very many games from 1959 have aged as gracefully as Diplomacy. Diplomacy is one of those games, the first time I learned it, I was so frustrated by its limitations. I couldn't believe you only have 1 unit in each spot, and yet it's those limitations that make the game so fascinating. It is one of the best negotiation games ever made, and yet there's almost nothing to negotiate. But you'll be at a meeting with another power and you'll realize that the fact that you know what France might do is itself a bit of a currency. Diplomacy allows players to be outrageously inventive in what things are worth money. The fact that it plays real time means that all players are engaged the entire game. There just aren't very many games about global geopolitics that are so light on their feet as Diplomacy. You can play it on your phone, you can play it on the computer, you can play with a hall full of 100 people, and it works great at any count.
At USC Games, I use Diplomacy in my class to teach emergent narrative. It's an amazing game because simple mechanics with important historical context create amazing stories of European conflict prior to World War I in general. Most of the important parts of this game take place away from the board. Players only gather around the board to make their moves, and then they go away to have meetings and discuss. And that negotiating dynamic and interpersonal dynamic becomes really powerful. But I do think that the historical context and the map are really important because it grounds the players in a sense of the culture, a sense of the geography, and a sense of the military goals. And it is complicated in its interactions in where the rules come together, but the basic rules are not complicated.
Diplomacy is a pure negotiation and bluffing game, and certainly the granddaddy of this genre. You cannot completely win this game without lying or bluffing sooner or later. In fact, the tagline that is often associated with this game is Diplomacy, ruining friendships since 1959. The concepts established here in this game have been done many times since, but this game is pure negotiation and bluffing, and absolutely amazing. You help me here, I'll help you there, but sooner or later, the backstabbing's gonna start.
The granddaddy of all negotiation games, Diplomacy. First published in 1959, Diplomacy has had countless memes and jokes talking about how it has ruined friendships for decades. And it's not lying. Players are representatives of countries negotiating terms and contracts and deals so that they can have world domination for their country. Wargaming isn't something that gets talked a lot about on BGG. And even though there are countless negotiation games, few do it better and are more memorable than Diplomacy. I myself was a huge Diplomacy player until the day someone threw a chair at me, in which case I took a hiatus for several years. It was a big chair. And I probably deserved it. But Diplomacy remains a classic today and deserves its induction into this Hall of Fame.
By placing blocks on a grid in Sid Sackson's Acquire, players start and expand businesses. They can then buy shares in those businesses, with the share value increasing as the business grows on the game board. When two businesses merge, the larger one takes over the smaller, giving a bonus to the two players with the most shares in the consumed company. You want to be a part of those buyouts, or you'll end up cash poor and unable to participate in the quest for growth. Aside from being a simple model of big business, Acquire is the precursor of modern Euro games, as it features no direct conflict and no player elimination. And that's why Acquire has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Acquire. This game is an absolute classic. First of all, it's a pinnacle of design for Sid Sackson, one of the early in the pantheon of great American designers. And second of all, consider the age. Published in '63 and still considered to be the greatest investment and stock holding game, or at least one of them. And it's still being actively played. In fact, Acquire is one of the 16 ring games that you can play at the World Series of Board Gaming each year. Nothing touches this game in the stock and investment genre, and that is why it is well deserved to be part of the BGG Hall of Fame.
Acquire is a really special game for me. So I discovered this 1960s 3M edition at my grandparents' house, and it makes me feel connected to my memories of them and to my family history. Even though I saw it and I thought, man, that looks so boring. But then a really kind stranger at a convention offered to teach me the game, and that experience turned into one of my favorite gaming memories ever. I had such a great time playing this game and digging into the strategy of it, and this Ameritrash gamer fell in love. I mean, this is the classic game about stocks and money and building hotels that should be in everyone's house, not Monopoly. Justice for Acquire.
Acquire is perhaps the most famous game from designer Sid Sackson. It's often said of Sackson that he was kind of like designing Euro games before Euro games were a thing. If you look at his work, it's very focused on kind of gameplay, player interaction. He never did roll-in moves and stuff like that. And Acquire is perhaps one of his crowning achievements. A lot of the features that you see in modern games were there 60 years ago in Acquire. It has had many, many different versions over the years, some better than others in terms of production. But again, if you have not had a chance to play Acquire, it is well worth checking out. It laid the foundations for so much of what we think of as modern and innovative, and you go back and say, wow, here's somebody that was doing this back in the mid-60s.
In Cosmic Encounter, you control an alien race with a unique power that allows you to manipulate the game rules while trying to claim 5 planets. When you attack a planet, the other players can offer support in the attack or defense of that planet, which prompts negotiation and temporary alliances as you try to keep strong aliens in check or join forces to possess a planet together. Shared victories are possible, as well as surprise wins thanks to alien-specific victory conditions. The original game only has 15 alien powers, but today hundreds of alien powers exist thanks to multiple editions of the game, as well as fan-created aliens that let everyone break the game's rules to their tastes. And that's why Cosmic Encounter has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Cosmic Encounter is one of the most influential games in the world. Sometimes people don't realize just how much this game did. I mean, it directly inspired Magic the Gathering. It was one of the first games to give the idea of having expansions to other games. But it was a game that, while it took the designers a long time to find a publisher, they eventually just published it themselves, just brought such a plethora of variety and just almost took the board game that was already existing at that point in time and just turned it upside down on its head. It's an amazing accomplishment of what they did, and the fact that it's still playable almost 50 years later is just mind-boggling for how enjoyable this game is. I love the game. I first played it when I was 13. I loved the idea of having my own special power. No game had ever shown me that I would be different than everybody else. And this constant, every game of this I played in my lifetime, probably 100 different times I've played now, every game has felt completely different. They've always been fun, negotiating, just seeing the craziness that can happen. No game brings me quite the joy that Cosmic Encounter does.
Cosmic Encounter is one of those games that's always been there, and when I say always, I almost mean always, because this game has existed in some form since 1977. Cosmic Encounter is all about doing weird stuff, because you're going to get an alien faction that basically breaks every single rule in the game, and they're going to try to win with that by making people help you and making them do what you want to do and betray other people when they don't like it anymore.
This shouldn't be a game that we like.
No.
But played with a real, like the right group, this is a blast to play.
Yes.
Because it's so many wacky things that happen, and as you said, we've had moments where the game isn't the game anymore because of an alien faction's rule that just turns it all upside on their head, and that's what makes this game so wonderful every time we play it.
We're talking about Alien Negotiations Cosmic Encounter. First released in 1977 by Eon, Cosmic Encounter has seen countless versions over the years, and it's quite possibly one of the greatest games ever made. But what I love most about Cosmic Encounter is that you are forced to attack players, and you don't get to decide whom you're attacking. You need to attack players and help other players attack so that you can all win the game, but you also need to help defend players from attacks so you can draw more cards. While there are many rules variations across the decades of gameplay, the core game itself is fantastic. And I think that's because Cosmic Encounter understands what most negotiated games don't do, and that is keep it all about the negotiation. Many years ago, Shut Up and Sit Down did a video about why Cosmic Encounter is the greatest modern board game of all time. You have the fiddliness of the poker chips, you have the direct player interaction with the negotiations, and the game forces those interactions, but more importantly, it's how the negotiations and the mechanics integrate to create unforgettable moments in gaming. But Cosmic Encounter taught me a very special lesson, and that is that as much as we are collectors of board games, even more so, we are collectors of stories. Because when you look at these games on your shelf, you see games, but really you see those memories, you see those stories, you see those moments, and you play those games again because you want to recapture that magic of those moments. And Cosmic Encounter does this better than most games out there, and that is why it deserves this space in the Board Game Hall of Fame.
In Francis Tresham's Civilization, each player leads a nation such as Assyria or Babylonia from the invention of agriculture to the emergence of the Roman Empire. Although battles and territorial strategy are important, this is not a war game. Instead, you advance your culture, economy, and political strength, with conflicts arising due to rivalry or a shortage of land rather than a desire to eliminate others. Nomads and farmers, warriors and merchants, artisans and citizens all have an essential part to play in your development. Civilization is considered the first game with a technology tree in which you can gain certain items or abilities only after first gaining others, mimicking the development of human culture. And that's why Civilization has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
So there are a lot of brilliant designers in the hobby, but I think only Francis Tresham can claim to have created essentially two full genres of game and the foundational text in both. Civilization is a Civ game that somehow is better than any 4X Civ game has ever been since it's been made. And it does that because it's so simple. It teaches designers and players alike that you can do a lot with a little. You don't need chariots and fancy units and all these bits and bobs to tell a compelling story. With just a few different markers and an amazingly expressive map, You can tell, the whole story of the rise and fall of the Western world. It's an incredible piece of design that, again, has aged pretty well. Sometimes the old games get a bad reputation for being too long, and I always want to tell folks, game length is the easiest problem to fix. You just stop playing when you're done playing. Civilization also has the benefit of one of the most amazing trading phases that's ever been designed. Your trading card's essentially blind, and after the trading phase is over, when people get their cards, you just hear screams as people realize that they've been hoodwinked. And it somehow captures all the drama of those big mid-century films. I think it's great. If you love Civ games and you haven't played Civilization, you were just in for a treat. I wish I were in your shoes.
Civilization was released in the US in 1982. And I would call it the first Civ game to be on the hotness as we know it now on BoardGameGeek. The game at the time of release and years after was played everywhere, at cons, in homes, at meetups. It was just that popular. And the release of Advanced Civ increased its popularity and solidified it as a very incredible design. Still today, as Stefan felt, Civolution races up the rankings. Designers still want to get the magic that this game plus this game gave us.
Civilization, a game back in my day. 1979, I'll never forget it. It was pretty much a cold winter, and this game just blew our minds because it was one of the very first that really maximized that 4X principle that you see today. Of course, now there's all kinds of miniatures and everything else that you can imagine with games. This just had chits, and we sat and we played for hours. Back in those days, there wasn't much, okay? But when we played this game, it blew our minds, and taking and battling amongst each other in the cold winters up in Connecticut. Back then they were cold, and just taking an entire Saturday afternoon and just having a great time with a great game that belongs in the BGG Hall of Fame.
1830 is a development of Francis Tresham's original 1829 game released in 1974. The game works by alternating stock dealing rounds and operating rounds. Stock dealing rounds allow players to buy shares in the available railway companies. Operating rounds allow the presidents of those companies to build track, run trains, and generate revenue for shareholders. This allows players to undermine others' plans and even force bankruptcy if there's an opportunity. 1830 became the definitive 18xx when it was released because Avalon Hill and Mr. Tresham greatly expanded players' choices and also shortened the game by removing the surveyor. Many games have come after 1830, but it will always stand as the 18xx game that made the genre famous. And that's why 1830 has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
1830, the game of railroads and robber barons, is a great game. Although it wasn't the first 18xx game, it did make the genre popular, this genre of economic, railroad building, and stock manipulation games. And if you've seen me around the internet, you know I love this genre of 18xx games. It's kind of like multiplayer abstract games. There's no luck, it's all player-driven, economic. You're building train routes, you have stock in companies, you can change the president's ownership of companies. You have to buy trains, build routes, run the routes, you get money, the stock goes up and down, the trains go obsolete and go away and you have to get new ones. There's a lot of stuff going on and all of it's player driven. Like everything that happens in the game is because of player actions, which makes the games have a lot of player interaction and also a lot of depth of thought because everything you do kind of matters in the long run. It definitely deserves its place in the BGG Hall of Fame, both for being like the starting point of the genre and also for still being a fun game.
1830 is actually, I think, the second game in the series of 18xx games. 1829 was the first. After that, it has spawned a huge following of other 18xx games, which each add their own individual quirks. One of the things that makes it great is in a sense, it's duality in that there's player holdings, players hold stock in companies, and companies play their complete own game. It's one of the first games, I think, that Joris actually taught me. We played together a lot, and we also made our own version, 1830 BC, set in ancient Mesopotamia, without any trains, but using canals and water.
1830 is a very cool game because it is a real business game in which you make real business decisions, and in that sense it's one of the first games that really simulates that in such a strong way, and it makes it the first of a whole series of games that have a different type of setting, a different type of play than many other games that may be about history or trains but not about business so much. I think 18xx is a great game because it requires a player to be capable of doing different things. So the two different components of the game, the stock market and the train game, are different and they require different skills. And that is, I think, something that Francis Strasson, the original designer of the series, was very good at. And I think it makes it very special. 18xx is a great game because it is a game that I've been playing for 35 years and I'm still very happy to play it any day. I don't think there is any other game I can say that about.
Even though 1830 wasn't my first 18xx experience, it was definitely the first time I got punched in the mouth. Like, it was crazy to get into the game, and between getting cut off with my first company, experiencing near bankruptcy in that first play, I've played 1830 6 times now, and each time I play it, I'm always like, it's so good. And I see now why every other 18xx game references 1830 or its precursor 1829 in the rules. It just means so much to have a chance to play a game so old that still works today with my gaming circles. But it really shows that there are so many gamers that love a really vicious, confrontational, direct interaction system. I just love that games like this exist.
I think it's just fascinating that Tresham basically open sourced the game system. You know, he said that it was okay for other people to make games called 18 whatever, that the graphics, you'll notice if you start picking up other games, are very, very similar to each other, which usually would be a no-no and kind of copyright, even if other companies are trying to like make another deck building game or something like that. But 18xx, it was allowed for other, you know, anybody who was publishing a game wanted to jump in on the action and make the next one in that series. So I think just for that reason alone, if it wasn't, you know, even putting aside the fantastic gameplay and the innovation and the lack of any kind of randomness at all in the game, it's really just notable for that reason.
1830 has become the template of the 18xx genre, spawning countless iterations, spin-offs, meditations, and variations. There would be no Railroad Tycoon, Age of Steam, Brass, Cube Rails, Food Chain Magnate, Clans of Caledonia, or I'll say it, Ticket to Ride, without the 18xx system. I mean, you could say, yes, these games could have come along anyway, but let's be honest, 1830 is the blueprint. It is undeniably the mother sauce of train games. 50 years later, 18xx games are now more popular than ever before. Websites such as 18xx.games have uncorked what was once a niche genre and made 18xx accessible to a wide range of players. A new generation is discovering what these games are all about. It's not just math and trains, it's deep, interactive strategy, it's surprising levity and comedy, it's twisty, epic narratives that can sit shoulder to shoulder with Twilight Imperium, or honestly for me, any Hollywood blockbuster. Now, I'm over 100 18xx games deep, but my dirty little secret is I've actually only played 1830 one time. I know, sacrilege. There are some who say that 1830 is the purest and best form of 18xx, and I will not disagree with them. But what I will say is that while I've only played 1830 once, each new 18xx game carries with it the 1830 DNA. So despite all the remixes and departures from the original, I do feel like 1830 is always embedded in my experiences. 40 years on, 1830 still feels relevant and fresh. It really exploded an entire genre out of its box, and it's still inspiring designers and players alike. I can't think of many games 4 decades later that have such an ongoing presence in the board game hobby. I think the only other title I can think of is, I don't know, maybe Civilization, which, by the way, was designed by Francis Tresham. So, like a train route from New York to Boston and back, it all comes full circle.
1830 is an economic game that asks so much from its players. You start the game with a pile of money and a lot of opportunities. You're gonna find yourself stepping on the opportunities of other players throughout the entire game. It's the sort of game that can be won and lost on the very first turn, but instead of that being frustrating, it just makes you want to play it again. The first time I sat down to play 1830, I was a little nervous about sitting down for a game that was going to be several hours long, and then I looked at my watch a moment later and 8 hours had passed and we were getting ready to do the final counting. It is an incredible design that is just filled with a lot of wonderful color. It's also a game that was really generated by the modern board game scene. It's a game that became brilliant through its development processes. And in that way, it's the first of a type of game. I mean, mini games owe a lot to their developers, and I don't think that's ever been a stronger case than the crew that put 1830 together.
In 1993, mathematician Richard Garfield took inspiration from Cosmic Encounter and Dungeons & Dragons to craft the world's first and most successful collectible card game, Magic the Gathering. Themed as a head-to-head duel between enemy wizards, Magic established many of the mechanisms and business models that dominate the board and card game space today. Card rarity, deck construction, and regular expansions ensured that Magic's many fans embraced it as a lifestyle game that they literally invested in while crafting a personal deck that reflects their identity. The unprecedented success of Magic cannot be overstated, bringing millions of people into the hobby. And that's why Magic the Gathering has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Ah, Magic the Gathering, my beloved. Oh, hello. It's me, Becca Scott from Good Time Society, and I'm here to tell you about Magic. The most basic mechanics are simple. Each player brings a deck of cards constructed from their personal collection. Every deck is a mix of land cards, which provide a resource known as mana, and spell cards, which use that mana to perform the titular magic. Whichever player or planeswalker, as we call it, can use their spells to bring the other player or players' life totals to 0 first, wins the game. Easy, right? Well, with over 36,000 unique cards and growing, all designed to interact with each other in different ways, no two games of Magic are ever alike. So why is it going into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame? Because this is the greatest card game of all time! That's right, Uno fans, come at me. I'm gonna tell you 5 reasons why. Number 1, it's evolution. This card game has existed for 32 years. You could put a card that was made in 1993 into your most recent deck and no one would bat an eyelash. But at the same time, Magic in 2025 looks totally different than it did even a few years ago, with new lore and new mechanics that keep the game fresh and exciting. Number 2, there are so many formats to choose from, there's gonna be one that's right for you. Of course, there's the competitive 1v1 formats. You've got Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Vintage, each with their own set of allowable cards that make that format unique. Then there's Limited. This includes formats like Draft and Sealed, where you crack open 15 card packs and build a deck on the fly. This is definitely the most even playing field way to play, and one of my favorites because you just get to show off how good you are and didn't do any homework. But the most popular format is Commander. Often played with 4 people, this last player standing mode requires deft politicking, where the biggest threats are neutralized by the collective will of the other players, and the table talk is half the fun. I like to make some deals, if you know what I mean. Each playgroup sets their own Rule 0, where they determine what level of competition is right for their table. Ours is pure jank. Number 3, the community is huge and keeps on growing, including all kinds of people, and you could be part of it. There are Magic players from all around the world. Most local game stores host a Friday Night Magic. You probably have that friend who is dying to teach you how to play right now. Having people to play with is often the biggest hurdle to getting your favorite game on the table, and no matter where you live, there are inevitably people in your vicinity that are ready to shuffle up a game of Magic with you. Magic is for everyone. Number 4,
personal customization. I built a squirrels deck, a card draw enchantments deck, a flying dragons deck, a turn creatures into creepy balloon heads deck, giant insect deck, cute corgi deck, and I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of all the fun combinations of things I'd like to try and build. Bringing something I created to game night and having someone say to me, "Whoa, that deck is awesome," or better yet, asking to borrow one of my decks, gives me no greater sense of pride. And number 5, big brain plays. You never forget the satisfaction of finding new combinations of plays in your own deck that escalate in ways you didn't even imagine when you put it together. I truly feel like a genius when my deck goes off, as we say in the lingo. So, now that you know all the things there are to love about Magic, all you need to remember is your brand new mantra. Untap, upkeep, draw, first main, combat, second main, instep, and pass. It's as easy as that.
Magic the Gathering is easily, by far, one of the most influential games of all time, especially the 21st century. It completely revolutionized everything about gaming. And it's been mind-blowing that ever since Magic the Gathering, there have been countless TCGs and CCGs or LCGs coming out every year, but only 3 have stuck around in the last 30 years. Just 3. And you know which 3 those are without me having to tell you. But it's not just the concept of dueling wizards, summoning creatures and beasts and fighting them and doing spells that instantly interrupt the other player. It's the entire business model itself. The idea of a starter pack and booster packs that have random assortments of cards, which led itself into tournament play and sweeping the entire nation and world with Magic the Gathering. I remember being dumbfounded by watching ESPN2 showing a Magic the Gathering on ESPN2. Mind-blowing for what it was back in the day. And it's been so amazing to see more and more people getting into this hobby, more people sharing this hobby, and the Magic and Gathering community just explode to where it is now. It is the life and blood of the local game stores in North America. It helps keep them alive and afloat. And it is a lifestyle game.
I'm going to talk about a game you might not expect me to talk about, which is Magic the Gathering. There are people who are much more hardcore Magic the Gathering players than I am. I'm not currently doing Friday Night Magic or anything like that. But nevertheless, it has had a huge impact on me as a gamer and really on the course of my life. And I suspect that other people are kind of in the same boat. So I remember seeing Magic cards in 7th grade when it first kind of started to hit, and my parents refusing to go buy it for me. And so I was jealous from that time. And so when I had a friend who played Magic in grad school, I started to play it, and I have never felt addiction like that. So this is probably Gate Crash era. I absolutely loved playing the game to the point where I was looking at pictures of cards online and thinking about how they could interact and trying to build theoretical decks, getting the cards that I did have and going to challenge my friends. And it was amazing, honestly. And I was looking for that feeling, and I couldn't play as much as I wanted to. And so I actually ended up finding the Lord of the Rings living card game because I wanted a deck construction game that was cheaper and that I could play cooperatively and by myself. And that is actually how I became a solo gamer, which has now led to me starting a YouTube channel, becoming a game designer, and quitting my job as an educator to work full-time in the game industry, which I truly don't think any of it would have happened if I had not encountered Magic the Gathering. So, Magic the Gathering, you may be expensive, but without you, where would we be as a hobby?
I am so grateful to Magic the Gathering because it's one of the games that got me into the great big world of modern board games. When I was 10 years old, we had a family friend that just gave me boxes and boxes of Magic cards. Now as an adult, I realized those were the cards he didn't care about. But I was 10 years old. I didn't care. I thought it was so cool looking through all the cards. And I got obsessed with Magic from the age of 10 to 14. We had a game store that I lived near, and I would go and look through the glass at all this Magic single cards, and I would save up my money and allowance and mow lawns so I could buy cards and stuff like that. And I haven't played a lot of Magic over the last 20 years, but there's still such an amazing community for Magic. There are tournaments and events and stuff happening all over the world for Magic. There are so many 10-year-old kids now that are finding their way to games through Magic. There are so many adults that are still loving Magic and stuff like that. I just love that it's gotten so many people into games and that it helped me get into games. And so there's a reason it is still as popular, 30 years later as it was when it first started. It's just that great of a game, and that there's just cool combos and art and all that sort of stuff to explore in all the cards, and they're always releasing more content. So, if you want, you can always have Magic in your life for sure. So, yeah, thanks Magic the Gathering.
I'm here to celebrate Magic the Gathering, one of my favorite games and most played games and longest played games of any of the modern games that I've played. I started playing Magic the Gathering back in the revised format. This was, back in the 1990s, 1994, around that time. I was 12 or 13, I was in middle school, and I fell in love with the game. Just, it felt like I was opening something ancient and playing it with friends, and I loved that. It wasn't about collecting, it wasn't about spending all that much money on it at the time. I just really loved playing it. It's given me so many ideas for mechanisms over the years, because I think Magic does a fantastic job of integrating the theme of the set with the mechanisms in that set, and even the specific mechanisms. I'm working on a game right now, in fact, that was inspired not by the full mechanisms of Magic the Gathering, but one specific thing that I think Magic does really well. I think it's had a huge impact on the hobby as well. I think Magic is perceived as a collectible card game, which it is, but I think Magic has opened the doors to a lot of other ways of playing games as well. You can just play Magic with the cards that you have. You can buy all commons and play Magic. There's so many different ways to play the game, so many different formats to play the game, and so many different ways to engage with the game, whether it's playing head-to-head or playing Commander with multiple people. I love that Magic has opened the doors in that way. In fact, one of the coolest things that I think Magic the Gathering has done is it's embraced fan-created formats, which we've seen a little bit in other tabletop games where fans create content for a game, where they create a new way of playing the game, and then the designer or publisher embraces that and brings it into an expansion or a future version of the game. But I think Magic is one of the games that does this in a really, really big way. There's so many different mechanisms and sets and themes and different things that Wizards of the Coast has done that has impacted the industry. Some not so good, but some many times for having a hugely positive impact. So I wanted to thank Magic the Gathering for its huge impact on me as a designer and as a gamer. And I think it has had a pretty huge influence on the gaming hobby as a whole.
Hobby gaming became a mainstream phenomenon in 1995 thanks to Klaus Teube's The Settlers of Catan. The game features multiple design elements still emulated today: constructive gameplay, variable setups, player interaction on every turn, and a family-friendly setting. Players start with modest settlements on an island and gain resources, wheat, sheep, wood, brick, and ore that they use to build roads, establish new settlements, grow cities, and acquire development cards that grant points or special powers. Don't have what you need? Trade with other players on their turn or yours. Catan, as the game is known today, has now sold more than 45 million copies, and it remains an entry point into modern gaming around the world. And that's why Catan has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Catan has that one magical aspect to it. It has that one little touch of something special. It's that one game, and it's kind of the symbol of the board gaming hobby in many ways. It's the one game that really broke out and allowed everything else in this hobby that we all love so much to exist. Catan was the game that got me into the hobby. It's the one that I played and just thought, oh, this is fun. Are there more board games? There were more board games, you betcha. It's a special game that is near and dear to my heart, that just has a quality I think no other game might have. I'm really very thankful for Catan. It's provided that gateway that has allowed so many people to walk through into this hobby. It's just, there's something there that you just can't quite touch. But whatever it is, its inner box of Catan.
We love this game.
We love it. And I think it's significant in the hobby because so many people, this is their first game to really put them into the hobby.
It's a point of entry.
It's a point of
Into the
entry
hobby.
to so many people, especially us.
Yes.
Because this is the one that sent us down the road to discover all of these great board games out there, modern board games.
I totally agree.
Yes.
Now, when we started and
Yes.
found Catan, it was Settlers of Catan.
Yes.
And it was such an intriguing title. What are they settling? And it was an uninhabited island, and you're gonna come on board and start building your little townships and villages and turn them into cities, and you're gonna make roads.
Yes.
And just all kinds
And
of
what
stuff.
really boggled our mind is that we're negotiating with each other.
Negotiation.
We're negotiating, trying to trade resources to help us build towns and cities and stuff. And we never did that before.
Never.
We trading and marking off territory. We're like, what is this going on?
And it was a game that gave you an open path to just do whatever you think is best.
Your victory is on you.
It's on you.
It's all
not
on you.
It was not controlled by a board going around
Yes.
in a circle or pulling out these particular cards. You decide how you build your village, if you interact with other people, if you decide to negotiate with people. It's up to you.
Yeah, and that's what I love about Catan.
It was mind-blowing.
Yes, it was.
Yes. And when Klaus Tuber put this game out in the middle of the 90s, it was like 95 or 96 when this game came out. I mean, it was a game changer.
Yes.
Pun intended.
Yes.
It changed the hobby in so many ways.
Why didn't we find it back then? Why?
It took us a long time to find this
Yes, we are so
game.
sorry it took us so long, but we found it.
Yes.
And now we love it.
And it changed our minds.
Yes, this showed us the way.
Yes.
Catan showed us the way.
And it got us into a hobby that we didn't know of. And then once we got into it, we were hooked.
Yes.
We wanted more and more and more. And then we became ORPG because of Catan.
Thank you, Catan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
At Leader Games, we have a lot of young designers and developers who are working with who've just entered the hobby in the last couple years. And every once in a while, I discover they've never played the Settlers of Catan. They just missed it. I mean, it was a game their parents might have played. So I find myself probably playing more Catan in this year, 2024, than I've ever played really in my life. And it still hits. It's an incredible design. When you open up and select the location for your initial cities, the way that shapes the entire game, and it's a shaping that isn't determined by a setup card, it's determined by a map and your choice of where to begin. And the entire economy of the game will kind of warp around those initial decisions. It's an incredible design accomplishment that I think is still just an absolutely urgent and pivotal design that everybody should check out.
In Wolfgang Kramer and Richard Ulrich's El Grande, players bid for actions and place caballeros in 9 regions of Spain. Bid high, and you'll get the action you want, but no new caballeros. And if you run out of caballeros, you'll have no influence on the game board. To get more caballeros, you must bid low, which might land you a useless action. To score a region, you have to outnumber others. And to score as many regions as possible, you're gonna have to spread yourself thin, putting you constantly on the edge of winning and losing. 30 years after its debut, El Grande remains the ideal area control game. And that's why El Grande has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I think El Grande is like the quintessential area control game. It is the one, right? 6 or 7 years ago, we played El Grande. Played it, and I said, well, why did people make games after this? Because the best game has been made. We can stop making games now. We can just all play El Grande, right? I mean, to this day, I think it's in my top 3 all time. And at any given point, it's number 1. It's so pure, right? It doesn't have a ton of extra complexity for complexity's sake. It has some interesting direct player interaction, right? Despite being an older Euro. And it definitely stands the test of time. We can go play it right now and it feels as modern as the day it was made. So I think just because of the personal ties, but also because of how good it is of a game, it just lives on as a classic.
El Grande is one of the earliest and still one of the greatest area control games of all time. It influenced a number of well-regarded games, including a few of my own personal favorites, Samurai, Blood Rage, and Wonderland's War. My favorite part of El Grande is the Castillo. Instead of placing knights on the board, you can drop them in the castle. It scores like any other region, but before revealing the winner, you'll secretly choose what region your knights will end up in. Battles are often won and lost from the knights that emerge from the Castillo. It's a brilliant design choice, and along with its streamlined yet rich gameplay, El Grande earns its place in the BGG Hall of Fame.
El Grande is an award-winning game, but moreover, this is the granddaddy of area control games in hobby gaming. And while there are about a dozen games on BGG ranked higher than El Grande did it first in 1995, and it's still a yardstick for all area control games out there, and is very deserving to be in the BGG Hall of Fame.
When I went to college, I was staying in a small dorm room, and I only had room for like 3 or 4 games, but one of the games I brought with me was El Grande. And I don't think I've played any game in my collection on a floor as much as I have played El Grande. And that same copy of El Grande I have, that I've owned for maybe 15 or 20 years, still gets play. It is an amazing game. I mean, somehow, we are still trying to figure out how to make a better area majority game, but nobody can beat the drama of the Grande moving around the board or the sound that those cubes make when they hit the Castillo. I think it's an incredible design that, again, reminds players the importance of having to play the table and their opponents. And the little blind selection discs also are, it's also like in its own way, El Grande is a bit of a genre mismatch. You get traditional area majority, you get action drafting and bidding, and then you get these simultaneous reveals that are so dramatic. For a game that is just a bunch of cubes on a board, it feels unbelievably thematic and compelling. And in some ways it was my first contemporary Euro game, and I'm still playing Euros today.
Reiner Knizia's Tigris Euphrates is both an abstract tile-laying game and an immersive battle between dynastic powers, building kingdoms in Mesopotamia. With only 2 actions each turn, players use their tiles, 4 leaders, and disasters to develop and control kingdoms that spread across the game board. As the game progresses, conflicts arise both internally from conflicting leaders and externally from merging kingdoms. Having leaders and kingdoms allows you to score, and each player's lowest score among 4 categories determines the winner. This scoring system prevents over-specialization and rewards balanced strategies, with players discovering new strategies with each game. It's no wonder Tigris Euphrates is often regarded as Reiner Knizia's masterpiece. And that's why Tigris Euphrates has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Tigris Euphrates is a very odd duck of a game. And I think it's very special, and let me just bear with me for a minute here, and hopefully this will lead you to where we want to go, is when I play this game, and not all aspects of it, but many aspects of it, make me feel like I'm playing a game that is hundreds of years old. It does not feel like a modern board game. Now there are certain other aspects that, like this, there's a particular scoring mechanism in this that feel very modern. But the game itself is very abstract, like a chess or a checkers. It feels like, in these ancient times with all these different varied religions and societies and governmental structures and stuff popping up and disappearing left and right. This has that kind of vibe with that. And it's all done through just placing little square tiles. There's no like dudes on a map. There's no dice rolling. There's no, extra hands of cards. There's no, smorgasbords of mechanisms. It's just very straight up simple tile placement. And there really is no other game like this since. And this came out, I think, in 1999, maybe 97. And really there's not been a game like this other than Yellow and Yangtze, which is another Reiner Knizia game, but it's kind of like a riff on this. So that if you want a different theme, you could do that. But there is something to me very peculiar about this where I feel like I'm playing like a chess or checkers type of game, but then it has a little bit of this heaviness to it in terms of like the ideas of what it's representing and the kind of the headspace that it puts you in. And to me that makes it very special, because in a similar way of chess, where you had the idea of these armies, with the pawns kind of in the front lines and the special units behind and the king and the queen, the generals, so to speak, in the back line and trying to protect, the main general, the king at the time. this kind of touches on some of those similar types of vibes with that, with the abstraction of ideas and the explosion and growth and then collapse and growth again and collapse again of opposing ideas in the cradle of humanity. So to me, that's what makes this still a very, very special game.
Reiner Knizia is my all-time favorite board game designer. He's pretty great. I don't know how, possibly some type of witchcraft, but he manages to distill things down to their core components, and what he manages to take from them is everything that goes into this game has to have a decision point that's easy to understand but devious to make, and he distills it all down to fun. And one of the greatest of all examples of this is Tigris and Euphrates. Not his simplest game, but it is a game that does something I cannot put into words. There's so much joy to be had in that game, even though it's so incredibly brutal and vicious. The Tigris of Euphrates, it's one of the most devastating war games out there in many ways. I'm taking over your whole thing and getting loads of points. But I'm still gonna lose because I've only got 6 red cubes. And that's my lowest cubes. There's always that twist. I've always called it the Knizia twist. And Tigris and Euphrates has that just perfectly done, where the scoring is your lowest cube at the end, you know, out of the ones that you can collect. And it's just like, I've done so well in so many other aspects. I've been the greatest warlord in all of Middle East. But no, you still lose because you weren't balanced in all things. What a magical experience. Infinitely replayable, always different. Kind of weird to learn and understand with the whole internal and external revolts. No one truly understands it. But it's one of the most fundamental examples of what makes Knizia such a fantastic designer.
Tigris and Euphrates by Reiner Knizia. I believe that Reiner Knizia is probably my favorite Euro war game designer. I really love this strategic game. It's one of the, I would say, bigger or more complex game in the work of Reiner Knizia. And this one has a lot of things going for it that makes me love it so much. The first thing is the theme. I think that the ancient Mesopotamia is not necessarily something that is depicted a lot and that I have a particular interest in, so for me that was the first thing. The second thing is that I think the gameplay is extremely clever, the design is extremely sharp, extremely elegant. This tile laying system is very cool. It gives player a lot of decision-making space to play around. The scoring system, where you're trying to score victory points in different categories at once, and you cannot commit to just one type of victory point, but you're trying to find a stable equilibrium between your different aspects of the civilization that you're growing, is really elegant. And yeah, it's very smart. There is a lot of input randomness, so you don't know what you're gonna get, but you have to do the best that you can with what you have. Is very, very cool. And I also think that the very old school version, I have the German version here, is the best because it has those very cool wooden pieces, and I would never trade them for anything plastic. It is a beautiful game, a masterpiece, a classic. Everyone needs to play it at least once.
At first, many people loathe the bidding game Ra, coming to love it only with experience. On each turn over 3 rounds, you either add a random tile to the display or call for an auction on the displayed tiles. You can only bid with your few bidding tiles, with a winning tile becoming part of the next lot up for grabs. Tiles come in 8 types, including disasters that can wipe out your holdings, making every lot varied and hard to assess. The time to do this is limited as the embodiment of Ra, the sun, races across the sky, forcing the round's end and scoring. Reiner Knizia's Ra is quick to learn and play, but the subtleties of bidding, second-guessing others, and judging lots make it a complex, simple game that demands multiple plays. And that's why Ra has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I love auction bidding games. They are some of my favorite types of games, and Ra remains the best auction bidding game out there. This game came out in 1999, and it's wild that, 25 years ago, we had the best game in this genre. There have been so many auction bidding games since Ra, and I like a lot of them, but none of them ever are as good as Ra. It's just such a great game. It's got such great mechanisms. You are bidding for some tiles, but what you're bidding, then you're switching out for what's coming back, and it's updating your bidding tiles for the next round, and it's just such an interesting system. And I keep trying to find an auction bidding game that is going to sort of top Ra for me, and nothing has. There's a lot of other good ones, but Ra is just such an amazing game, and it's just such an amazing system. And there have been multiple versions of it along the way over the last 25 years. People keep sort of republishing, reproducing it. You don't get to be called a great game if you don't have multiple versions, I feel like. And so there are a lot of versions of Ra, and it remains my favorite auction bidding game all of these years later.
I love the game Ra. I really, really love Ra. This is my favorite auction game, one of my favorite push your luck games, and it has some of the best set collection, I believe, in almost any game. Ra is a game that really caught me off guard because I hadn't played a lot of auction games at the time that I first played Ra, and then I played Ra and I was like, wow, this is what an auction game can be. This is the tension in the game, the limited number of resources that you have to spend, because you only have 3 or 4 tiles that you can spend each round. It's not like you're juggling a bunch of currency that you can spend at variable amounts. You only have those 3 or 4 tiles. And just the element of not knowing when the game will, or when each round will end. I actually think I first played Ra on a digital platform. I think I played the digital version of Ra. And it really opened me to the idea, playing that digitally, opened me to the idea of playing a game digitally for the first time, a board game digitally, and then discovering what that game could be, like the tabletop version of Ra, and then wanting to explore it on the tabletop as well. I think the two mediums can coexist, and that definitely had a big influence on me as a gamer, that I could try a game digitally and then go buy it in the hard copy form. And I love this version of Ra from 20th century. I think Ian O'Toole did a fantastic job with the art and graphic design. And it opened my eyes again to games that get new additions, that really breathe new life into the game, as I think 25th Century did. I think Ra has had a pretty big impact on the hobby. Obviously, Reiner Knizia has designed many hundreds of incredible games. But I think this is my favorite game of his, and I think it's a testament to what set collection can be, what auctions can be, and what push your luck element of games can be, all combined into one really beautiful package. So yeah, Ra, one of my favorite games, and I think it's worth celebrating.
Oh, what a game, huh? Ra, 1999. What a wonderful game Ra is, and I was scared of it at first. Ra terrified me. I saw the Shut Up Sit Down video first, and I was confused, scared, and I'm not just talking about my feelings seeing Quinn's in that outfit. I didn't quite get what the game was about. I didn't understand anything what was going on. Ra is a game that you sit down and you learn, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. Auctions, push your luck. But then when you think on it, you're like, oh, wow, there's a lot of interesting systems here. Yeah, everyone has distinct numbers. You can't ever bet the same, sure. Everyone is choosing when auctions happen, unless they're forced. And what you're auctioning on is an interesting balance of things that stick around, things that you're waiting for. Like when you're waiting for a flood tile, am I right? Like, come on. When's it gonna happen? That's what I'm talking about. And it's that waiting for the tiles that you want that makes it so fun. It makes you care about other people's turns. Are they gonna call Ra when you don't want them to? Do you have high numbers and you want it to get juicy? Do you have low numbers? Are you the one calling Ra? Every decision that Reiner made in this game is so smart. It is the pinnacle of game design to me. It is so fun. It is so funny to have so much humor in the design. I don't know how he did it. and it has so much math at the same time. I think we could all learn from Reiner Knizia. It's a man, it's a legend, it's a wonderful game. And hey, don't take my word for it. Look at what number BGG has it on. That's right. The URL is a ranking. It's a hidden ranking that BGG has. It's their favorite games. All right, thanks so much. I've been Dry Then Wet Taylor. Thank you for watching. Go play Raw right now, please.
Each turn in Klaus Jurgen Reed's Carcassone, you draw and place a tile that shows road segments, part of a city, a cloister, or grassland in some combination. City must connect to city, road to road, and over time, players develop their own version of a southern French landscape. With each tile you add, you can place one of your tokens, a meeple, on part of it, a knight in the city, a robber on the road, and so on. When a feature is complete, players score that feature's tokens and get them back to use again. You can play friendly or cutthroat with the base game alone, or with more than 100 expansions, making Carcassone one of the most accessible and expandable games ever made. And that's why Carcassone has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Today I'm going to be talking to you about the game Carcassone and why it's significant in our hobby and why it's special to me. Carcassonne is one of those games that's been around for a while, and many of us have played it, started off playing it, or maybe later in our board gaming journey, but it's definitely one that we remember and is possibly still in our collection. It's that tile-laying game that, you know, comes across as, yeah, it seems very straightforward, can appeal to many families, any type of gamer. But it also has those strategic moments, you know, where you're like, do I use that last meeple? Yeah, I'll do it. And then, okay, maybe I shouldn't have because I'm not going to score that. But it gets you thinking about these things. And that's a foray into some of those bigger games where you have those types of decisions or even bigger decisions, but in a similar vein. This kind of leads me into why it's important. The fact that I don't even have my copy to show you, and that's because I loaned it to a friend, and I haven't gotten it back. I'm not upset, but it just goes to show you that people continue to play it. They still have it. They still play it with their family, with their friends, and you know what? That enough. It makes me happy that it's still being played, and they're getting a lot of joy out of it. And hey, it's a nice way to greet people into the hobby with something that's not too intimidating, but does make people feel good, make people feel like they're making some of those important decisions in their board gaming. So Carcassone for me is it's one of those games that are, you know, you're going to see it in the digital world, we see it in merchandise, we see it everywhere, and there's a reason for that. It's a strong game, and it will continue to be played by many.
Carcassone takes the world of jigsaw puzzles and introduces the idea of what if, as you are building a puzzle, it is also a game. Carcassone, a tile-laying game, a game in which you take squares and place them on a board, building a picture, a tapestry of towns, of roads, of monasteries. It's fun to do. It almost feels like a collaborative effort, but it's not. As players are sitting there trying to place their ubiquitous meeples on the board, as you control roads, as you control towns, it's a very interactive game as we're fighting over who gets the most points from having the majority in different areas. And at the same time, everyone is kind of having a good, amusing time as they see just how the tiles are going to create a picture this time. With dozens of spin-offs and even more expansions, Carcassone can really be tailored to how everyone can play it. But the base game itself is one of those games that when you teach people, they sit there and go, I see how this works, as they place their first tile. It is a game that I've always enjoyed. I like the various spin-offs. I like the different expansions. I like the basic game. It is a game that's easy to teach people, and it's just fun to watch unfold. Very enjoyable, Carcassone.
Carcassone is legendary, not only because it introduced us to the adorable meeple, but also because so many tile-laying games today stand on its shoulders. Games from the last 5 years that I adore, like Beacon Patrol, or Cascadia, or even one of my personal favorites, Botnik, they all can trace their inspiration back to Carcassone. I think it still holds up today for two main reasons. Number one, it is intuitive. even someone playing a board game for the very first time, if it was Carcassonne, you understand that roads go with roads and cities go with cities. It just makes sense with that. And number two is that unlike games we grew up with have a big board in the middle and a lot going on, it just starts with one tile and we all get to build that board together and look at our creation after. Also, is our house the only one that has the house rule that you have to sing like a monk every time you play down a monastery? Is that just me? I don't know, whatever.
Carcassonne is one of the first games I played that drew me to the hobby, and I remember I played it in some board game cafe in Athens many years ago, and I was so excited about it that I kept bringing people over there to show it off. And I still get the same feeling sometimes when I suggest it to new people wanting to explore board games, because I know it's a game that will not fail. It was also my first contact with tile-laying games, and I still deeply enjoy getting a tile and rotating it, seeing how it can continue the map. And it's such a simple and elegant design, but there's still important decisions to make in the game, like should I go for a bigger castle later on, or should I go for a smaller one right now? Should I place my last meeple, or should I try to prevent others from expanding? And you never know what's going to happen scoring-wise until the end of the game, which is something I appreciate. But mostly it's the feeling you get when you play it, this coziness. Like, I feel like I'm going on a walk with my family in the countryside, and I do very much appreciate any game that makes me feel that way. And it's not random that it's a modern classic. It's been 25 years, I think, since its release, and I would still play Carcassonne and enjoy it very much.
To master Power Grid, you need to manage your money and know when to strike. During the game, you bid on power plants fueled by coal, oil, trash, and nuclear power, with plants being able to power more and more cities over time. Fuel for these plants is limited, increases in cost as the supply diminishes, and can even be entirely depleted. To put that fuel to use, you have to build a network of cities, seizing the best routes while they're still available. The more cities you power, the more money you make, but the later you go in turn order, which drives up fuel and route costs as you race to be the first to power enough cities to win. Designer Friedemann Friese has created dozens of themed expansions for this flexible game system that continues to evolve year after year. And that's why Power Grid has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Power Grid was one of the first economic games I learned to play after learning such gateways like Ticket to Ride and Settlers of Catan, as it was called in my day. Power Grid came out in 2004. That's over 20 years ago, a lifetime in the board game world. But for a game that came out that long ago, it doesn't feel dated at all. It's where I first learned about the price fluctuations of an economic market, a thing that's so commonplace now with many other Euros. I also learned how crucial turn order is. Power Grid has a unique mechanism that I love, where some phases will go from first to last, and then last to first. So positioning yourself in turn order is very important, as resources will get more expensive, or you might get blocked out of a city that you're trying to build into. For a Euro, Power Grid is highly interactive. I love the bidding war that happens when you're trying to acquire power plants. I just like sitting back and seeing players escalate and outbid each other, and then immediately are filled with regret because they spent too much on acquiring a power plant. If you spend that $1 extra, it might come back and bite you in the butt. I've seen many games come down to that missing dollar that they overspent in previous rounds. Many of the things about Power Grid I enjoy are cornerstones of other Euro games. I love Power Grid so much that I have a bunch of maps for it. Central Europe, Russia, Japan, the Mideast, and Australia. Power Grid is such a classic economic game, one that I can never say no to.
When Power Grid was released in 2004, I was still playing Settlers and Carcassone with my high school buddies after being introduced to them while living abroad. The only other Friedemann Friese game that I played up to that point was Finsterfloor. Today, Power Grid is my favorite board game, by far my most played, and it's inspired me to play nearly every other Friedemann Friese game. It introduced a market system that I think is still one of the best in gaming, and incentivizes turn order jockeying in an unintuitive and risky way. I'm incredibly grateful to the community of BGG for continuing to be a place to share resources, connect over a shared love of games, no matter where or who you are. And I'm grateful to be representing Power Grid in this celebration of BGG's 25th anniversary. Welcome to the Hall of Fame.
Power Grid is a masterpiece from designer Friedemann Friese, and it's one of those games that is very simple but very deep. I can teach this game in probably 10 minutes, and even though you haven't played a lot of board games, you will understand what you're supposed to do. You will not manage to do it, especially not if you're playing with Sunniva, because she has always won this game.
That's actually so weird because my math is not good, but this is Math the board games. Yes. Everything you do, it's an economical decision. Everything that you do, you are bidding on things, you are then buying things from like a market, and it's so economical, but weirdly enough, I really love it.
Alan R. Moon designed a half-dozen train games before he created Ticket to Ride, which has been a runaway success since its debut. The game is driven by rummy-style card play, with players drafting cards, then playing colored card sets to claim matching routes on the game board. Each route claimed earns you points, but you also want to claim routes that connect the two cities listed on your secret ticket cards. If you do, you gain extra points at game's end. If not, you lose those points instead. Want to play risky? Draw more tickets and see what you get. Ticket to Ride can be played by all ages, whether casually or competitively, making it an ideal game for players of all skill levels. And that's why Ticket to Ride has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Ticket to Ride is arguably the quintessential big box gateway game. So much so that shelves and bags will advertise how many Ticket to Ride sized games it can hold. It is so ubiquitous, I think, because it's so approachable. The turn structure is simple. You're either playing down trains or drawing cards. And so because you have a destination that gives you a little bit of guidance on where to go, it is really, really accessible for many folks. It's special for me personally because those folks that it's accessible for are my folks, as well as my in-laws. Both my parents and my wife's parents really love this game, and it's one of the only games we can get everyone around the table to have a great time. There's also lots of different maps since the original game, my personal favorite being Japan, that has the public transportation bullet trains, which I think is really, really splendid. So if the US map or Europe map don't really appeal to you, I'm sure there's a map out there that will resonate.
Ticket to Ride is such a great game. You don't have to be train enthusiast to like it, like Taryn here, you love your train and subways.
I do like maps.
I do like train to transport, but I do love how Ticket to Ride introduced it first to me, the mechanics of contract fulfillment and then network building, and with competitiveness. So America was the first one I played, and then of course there are so many other ones, and then there's Legacy as well, and they keep true to themselves the mechanics of card drafting and then building network, which I love.
I think where it still holds such an important place within the hobby is that it is the simplest and broadest network building game out there, and there are so many network building games. Trains and forming routes is such a big part of what makes a lot of board gamers' minds tick. So that gives it a really good pride of place in the gateway space.
And it is on Board Game Arena. That's why we keep playing it, just smashing it, games after games after game, just for fun. And I continue to play Ticket to Ride online.
I actually don't like trains, but I love this game because it is one that my family, not really into games as much as I am, like we did party games growing up, but it was the first game that one of my siblings bought that wasn't a recommendation that I had given. Just seeing that there was a game that was so accessible that my family that are not normally gamers saw it on a Target shelf, bought it, taught themselves, didn't have me teach it, but liked it enough to where it inspired them to ask me for more things versus me trying to push things on them, was just awesome. And I mean, it's such a good game. It's so versatile, and it's so interesting to see all the different nuances between the maps and the mechanics that they do with it. So just as an approachable game to get people into gaming, I love it for that reason. And then I love the fact that it actually got my family to start wanting to play more strategic games and not just party social games.
Ticket to Ride is one of those games that when you play it almost feels so simple, and you think, why wasn't this game designed 50 years early? And in some sense, it is a variation on a very popular game called Rummy, but it just has that simplicity and yet this expansivity of the game. There's over 11 expansions for it. Just this game that thrives and lets you play with trains, but also you're just sitting around the table playing a card game. Ticket to Ride is a game that you can play with mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, that you can bring and have the whole family play around, but also it can turn on a dime, and if you want to, you can play for high stakes. It rewards both casual and strategic play. It gives you ideas of how to build these routes across whatever map you're on, and at the same time, sit there and try to gauge what your opponent's going to do. You can be laughing and talking while playing Ticket to Ride, or at the same time, a glint in your eye as you really wish you knew exactly where they were going. Ticket to Ride has been a game that I've enjoyed ever since it's come out. It is my favorite game to play with my wife as a couple, but I also love introducing it to people who've never played games before and to people who've been playing games for 20, 30 years. It works in every situation.
Ticket to Ride is one of the best welcoming board games of all time. I honestly think that it's gotten more people into the world of modern board games than most games out there. I mean, Saturday Night Live recently made a sketch about it. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg tweeted about it. There's just not a lot of games that have made it into the expansive popular culture like that, and I think that's great for the hobby. And Ticket to Ride is a really great welcoming game because it's easy to learn, you can play it with anybody, but it's still got strategy choices and a little bit of cutthroatness to it, and I think that's great for a welcoming game. I feel like anybody who plays Ticket to Ride for the first time either is like, this is amazing, I'm all in on board games, or they're like, I don't ever want to play a board game again because Nana cut off my route and screw her and I hate this. And that's just really funny to me. There's also a lot of different versions of Ticket to Ride, so you can find sort of smaller box ones, bigger box ones, all that sort of stuff. So I've just loved Ticket to Ride over the years, and thanks for being a great game, and thanks for getting a lot of people into games, Ticket to Ride.
In William Attia's Caylus, players collectively build the king's castle and the surrounding town in a Mother May I fashion. Each round, players take turns placing their workers on buildings along a path that leads away from the castle to call dibs on a specific action. Players determine which buildings are placed in which order along the path, giving each game a different feel. But placing a worker doesn't guarantee you'll get to use that building. At round's end, players can pay to move a provost back or forth on the path, and building actions stop where the provost stands, creating an element of cooperative play. Caylus popularized the worker placement genre, which has seen hundreds of new entries over the past 2 decades. And that's why Caylus has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Caylus is one of the most important games to come out in the last 20 to 30 years. It's sometimes cited as the original worker placement game. I think there's some quibbling and arguing around the edges on that note, but it's definitely one of the first. For me, what makes it still stick out even today, and also with its sequel here, Caylus 1303, is in most worker placement games, you'll go and put a worker down and then you'll get the stuff right away. Not all of them, but most of them do that. Now, Caylus was not one to do that. What you would do is you put your workers on a track, and then after the end of the round, when everybody's done taking actions, you'll go and walk down this track, which is leading out of this castle, and then resolve those action spaces and collect goods or make trades and that kind of thing. Now, it's possible that the place where you put the worker didn't actually activate at the end of the round because there's this piece that you would move around called the provost or the jerk. And depending on how players bribed and manipulated that piece, it could end up that a worker that you put down didn't actually activate. So there's an interesting sort of piece of tension and a little bit of bit of a nuance to chew on there as you're going and placing your workers during the course of the round, because you got to know, oh, well, I got to keep enough money to bribe this guy to get him away from me, or to pay him to screw Billy over here, and that kind of thing. And so that adds an interesting dynamic. It's not for everybody because it is a little bit mean. But the other part of that is interesting to me with this game is that it's all surrounded around building up this castle, and then the surrounding city and the surrounding economy and everything that comes with this construction job of this castle. So as you're building up the castle, the town is also developing. You're building buildings to support that. And so, there's an industry and stuff that kind of crops up all around this main goal of, these people at this time. And you see that visually on the board as that same route that I talked about with the workers that you place down, that becomes buildings, and those blank spaces become things that you can use, and then you can get rewards for that for people using your building. So you become part of that industry, which kind of is like adjacent to this main industry of the castle building. So it has all of those kind of things worked in there, and it's worker placement, to my mind, with a purpose. Because like I said, you've got the possibility of not having your stuff be activated, and the stuff visually and dynamically grows on the board as you play the game, so you can kind of see it feels very organic that way for it to do that. I think it was so successful, and also, if I recall correctly, inspired Uwe Rosenberg to develop Agricola, which really exploded things with the worker placement game, and now we see worker placement all over the place. It's as ubiquitous as a hand of cards at this point almost. So anyway, a lot of credit goes to Caylus for that, and I think you can still pick up the original, but they've got their 1303 one, which has some nuance around the edges there. And some things I miss about the original in this one. If I play the original, then there's some things I miss about this one. So pick up one of them, and I think you'll have a lot of fun. A little bit mean, but it's fun.
Caylus is the somewhat forgotten worker placement masterpiece that is still beloved by mean old grognards like myself. There are two twists that make this game different than just kind of like a bog standard worker placement game. One is that the buildings, the action spaces that you go on, you can own those. You can build new ones. The game expands as more buildings are built. And so if someone goes onto your building, you get compensation for them going there. So building buildings, even if you don't end up using them, that's a good thing. Second, you place your workers on these buildings, but that is no guarantee that they are actually going to be activated. And that is because of the provost. The provost is what makes this game highly interactive and highly social. And it's this little white wooden cylinder that players influence how much it moves down the path of the city. And if your building is not within the path that the provost has traveled, then those actions do not happen. So every single turn, what happens is that there's this grand negotiation or Weedle Fest between players to determine how far this provost is going to move along the path. And shouldn't we really just punish Tom for taking the best buildings near the edge of town in his greedy way? Yes, we should punish Tom. So ultimately, this game is about your contributions to both the city and the new castle, and the king rewards you for your contribution. But that's only like the score of the game. The real victory are the cries of your opponents as their workers languish on buildings that somehow fail to activate.
Caylus from William Adia is a really fascinating game, and it's a real great example of just, I feel, the gaming hobby and the game design hobby kind of elevating to a new level, because there's nothing incredibly super innovative about Caylus, right? There's a lot of pieces that were pulled together from other places. There's a few little tweaks in there, but it basically, took mature elements and remixed them in a really, really, really interesting way. It has a character in it, the Provost, which you will come to hate. But the Provost kind of gets his own personality, even though in the game, he is a little white disc, just a flat white disc that you just move up and back. But people have very strong feelings about the Provost, and I think that it's just very cool the way you can take that abstract thing and put it into it, even more so than say the CATAN robber or something like that. I think the Caylus Provost is probably one of the most hated entities in gaming. I also would be remiss if I did not mention that my original co-host on Ludology, Ryan Sturm, was a huge fan of this game. And if you would all listen to Ludology, you will find that we used it for many, many examples of, different types of, elements and ways you can bring things and ways you can do things. And Caylus was always an amazing touchstone for us.
Ananda Gupta and Jason Matthews' Twilight Struggle allows two players to relive the Cold War, the 45-year period after World War II, which the Soviet Union and the United States tried to influence governments and political movements around the world, often through proxy wars. Players track their influence in Europe, Central America, the Middle East, and elsewhere on a world map, taking turns playing cards that highlight events from actual history. Cards can be played for their event or for operation points to influence regions, attempt coups, affect the space race, and more. Twilight Struggle has appealed to a wide audience of gamers because it gives players a different type of war game, one that mimics how in the real world war takes many forms. After countless awards and being ranked #1 on BGG for a few years, it's undeniable that Twilight Struggle has had a huge impact on our hobby, and its tense card-driven gameplay has inspired so many other wonderful historical board games. And that's why Twilight Struggle has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Twilight Struggle. So this one was designed by Jason Matthews and Ananda Gupta. It is the first GMT game that I ever bought, and I believe it's the first historical game that I've ever played. It is a card-driven game where you're gonna play against an opponent, and both players are going to be playing the two rival factions during the Cold War. So one player is going to be playing the USSR, the other is going to play the US. And you're going to use cards to influence countries, do some coup attempts, and do different things. The first time I played this, it really blew my mind. I had never played a game like this, and it's the first time that I realized that history could be taken seriously in the board game form, and it completely changed my mind about what board games could do. It actually was the starting point of my passion for historical board games. To this day, it is one of my favorite board game ever, and I played a lot of board games inspired by it and that came before it using cards. I think it is a very interesting system overall, so if you have never played a card-driven game, a card-driven war game, I would really recommend that you try. And this one is a masterpiece. I think it's a classic for a reason, and I believe my favorite card in the game is Charles de Gaulle, because there is nothing more satisfying than shifting the tides of power with a single card, and I hope you'll give it a try.
Twilight Struggle is a monumental achievement in board game design. It's unbelievable how the entirety of the Cold War has been condensed into a game that not only is fun to play and not only has lots of strategy, but also doesn't seem to cut away from the history. You feel like you're learning whenever you play this game, and at the same time answering those questions, what if? All the major events that have happened over the different parts of the Cold War, from the space race to the different incursions and uprisings all over the world, are really meticulously put down in a very clever card game. Built on other card-driven war games, but seemingly just coming to its highest point, Twilight Struggle stands out as a game that war gamers would enjoy, but also people who aren't as interested in that and might play more strategic games. I really like it. I've lived a good chunk of my life in the Cold War, and so a lot of this is interesting to me from both a historical and a personal level, but also I just like playing a fun game.
Today, I'm going to talk about one of the greatest games ever made, Twilight Struggle. Twilight Struggle enters the BGG Hall of Fame, and it totally deserves it. First published in 2005 by GMT Games and designed by Ananda Gupta and Jason Matthews, Twilight Struggle was ranked #1 on the BGG scale for over 5 years, which is a feat in and of itself. Brilliant. War games don't get enough love on BGG, and I think most gamers would be shocked and surprised to find out that so many modern-day board gaming mechanics can have their origins traced all the way back to wargaming. Instead of having free reign control of all the chits and units and moving them across a hexagon map, Twilight Struggle abstracts those decisions into a hand of cards that have multi-use functionality, allowing players to do one or several things. Typically, it's choosing between the real powerful event that could be either yours or your opponent's, or using the card for a wide range of possible actions. But with the approachability of the CDG mechanic, Twilight Struggle popularized the presence of war games in modern day gaming. Perhaps it's the fact that it's about the Cold War, this 45-year dance between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Perhaps because when it first published in 2005, most of the gamers of that day grew up in the tail end of the Cold War. Without Twilight Struggle, I don't know if you would have the coin series. I don't know if you would have Root. And with the familiarity of the cards and through repeated play and being more familiar with the deck of cards in the game, you become a significantly better player. And make no mistake, you can get fractal deep talking about strategy in this game. There are YouTube channels designed just to talk about each individual cards of the deck. But people wouldn't give all this passion and praise to Twilight Struggle if it didn't deserve it. And Twilight Struggle definitely deserves its induction into the Board Game Hall of Fame. And for one Twilight Struggle fan, to all those out there, thank you for making gaming amazing.
Civilization games have been a standard on the game market for decades, but in Through the Ages, designer Vlaada Chvátil reinvented the genre by doing away with the seemingly prerequisite world map and having players focus more abstractly on technologies, leaders, and wonders one would expect to find. Over 4 ages, players guide their civilization of human development through a card drafting system that consistently forces hard economic and tactical decisions. With random setups and powerful events ensuring no 2 games are alike, Through the Ages is a wonder of high conflict, heavy Euro game design that will challenge your ability to manage people, resources, and ideas. And that's why Through the Ages has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I'm here to tell you about Through the Ages, A Story of Civilization. This, for me, is a very special game. This is an original version of the game that came out in 2006. I was there at Essen Spiel when word got around that a new company from the Czech Republic and a brand new designer has got a Civilization-style game, which was one of my favorite types of games of all time. And I went over and I went, wow, this game looks absolutely amazing. And I picked it up. Now, this version of the game is very special for me for a number of reasons. Like I mentioned, it was the start of my relationship with Czech Games Edition, the year after anyway, and I started to get to know Vlaada Chvátil. That led to various things, and including me now working full-time in the industry. Now, the thing with this game is I will never ever play this game again. I'm keeping this version for sentimental reasons, but in 2015, it got replaced by Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, which is effectively a 2nd edition version of the game, tweaking a number of the rules and a number of the cards, and basically refining the whole game and making an already excellent game even better. I was very proud that I worked as a little bit of developer on that game. One of the cards in particular in the new edition has got wording that I suggested, but even the new version of the game, I will very likely never play it again in physical form, and that is because there is now a digital app called Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, the digital version, and it's so good. It is probably, in my opinion, the best digital adaptation of a board game. It took CGE 4 or 5 years to develop, and it was a huge amount of work, but the game is absolutely amazing. So if you are interested in a really heavy Civilization style game, and you don't mind playing games on the app, either asynchronously with your friends or against the computer AI and a series of challenges, then definitely recommend the digital version of Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization.
Through the Ages is a civilization game, and it is iterating on an existing tradition of civilization games, starting with the board game Civilization and then jumping to the video game of like Sid Meier's Civilization, and then bringing it back into the board game space, kind of maintaining those things that now like define the civilization genre. So Through the Ages has leaders, it has wonders, it has resources, food, science, culture, things that you will find in the video game, and then bringing it back into a board game. And it's like, how do you do this? Well, One of the most remarkable things about Through the Ages is they got rid of the map. There's no map. Like the most defining thing about the original Civilization game, giant map, takes all day to play, got rid of the map. Instead, it focused on the economic elements, the way your game evolves over time, but it also preserved the conflict. Lots of conflict still there. But at its core, it's an economic game. And I really insist that this is a model of design, like the kind of design that students should study. Whether you're a board game designer or a computer game designer, you could do a lot worse than look at the systems and Through the Ages and say, I want to build the economy of my game around these kind of like simple mechanisms.
When Through the Ages first came out, it was a revolutionary game. It attracted so much attention, and it was the reason why CG came together and eventually became a publisher. And it's a game that after 20 years, it's been played so much. There's still like a huge hardcore fan base. There's lots of tournaments. And I think especially the newer edition, it's phenomenal. And it's probably my most favorite CG game. It's a game I love so much that I do not care if still after so many plays and so much effort, I don't seem to be able to prevent myself from losing. I love the fact that you're building your civilization from the ground up. And to do that, you need to take care of many different things. Like you need to do your mining, your science, your culture, your army, your food, your government, and so many things. But in the end, only one resource matters, and that's culture. But in order to do that, you need to take care of all the others, which is, it's impossible to do everything in this game. And this is the reason why I keep going, because this is like, it's a constant struggle and so many difficult decisions. And everything in the game is situational. There isn't like a dominant strategy. You need to develop like a gut feeling for it and you know, play incessantly. And I love how thematic it feels with all the different leaders across time and the different effects. And also the function of war feels very thematic and realistic. Like you cannot have a game of Through the Ages where it's totally peaceful. You can try, maybe sometimes it happens, but if you're the weaker target, you are going to go through war. And I really enjoy the depth and the epicness of this game and how many things you can do differently every time.
Through the Ages is my favorite board game. I was always such a massive fan of the Civilization video games by Sid Meier when I was growing up, and it's very apparent to me that Through the Ages was an adaptation of those games in particular. It does such a good job of preserving all of the systems about managing your civilization, whether that's their happiness, culture, science. Military is obviously a big component of that as well. But it gets rid of the map and some of the other 4X elements in favor of this massive array of cards that represents your leaders, your technologies, your wonders. And it makes that the heart of the game in this card market. And while a lot of games like have card rows, you know, Through the Ages does it better than all of them because you're trading your actions, your action economy in order to get cards early. And sometimes that's just because that's the most important thing you need right then. Sometimes you just don't want an opponent to get it. And that's really, I think, the heart of what makes this game so great is that every card in that deck could situationally be the most important thing to you just then and there. And navigating those cards as they come out era by era is really what it's all about. I have played a lot of this game and I'm still learning things about it every time I play it. It's just a really incredible thing.
In Agricola, players take the role of a 17th century Central European family of farmers. Each turn, players use the husband and wife tokens to take actions from an expanding array of options, one of which is family growth. Time to have a child and put them to work. As the game progresses, you can plow and sow fields to grow grain and vegetables, fence off your land, breed animals, start occupations, add major and minor improvements, expand your home, upgrade said home, and more. You want to do so much, but time is against you, as well as the threat of starvation if you don't feed your family. Agricola launched a wave of imitators and gave designer Uwe Rosenberg a second career after the success of Bonanza. And that's why Agricola has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I think Agricola did a couple of really important things. Agricola is a complex game, but because it has a domestic theme, it's very easy for players to internalize rules. So to me, it showed how much themes can give to a design, both to further the kind of stories they can tell, but also the sort of mechanical overhead. I mean, my wife had really never played board games until she played Agricola. She jumped right into the deep end, and it was a pivotal game for us. I also think Agricola is one of the first games to navigate the space between a really robust, mechanically driven Euro and a giant deck of special power cards. And today, we're living in a world of Arc Novas and Terraforming Marses and stacks of birds in our Wingspan sets. That's a world that Agricola helped build.
So Agricola, why does it belong in the Hall of Fame? Very easily. In 2007, it really set the world on its head as far as work replacement games are considered. It was beautiful. It was beyond everything, and people lost their minds. And from there, work replacement almost became a staple in almost every single game. It was the very first game I ever played at a board game convention. I've been to military miniature conventions, but a board game convention, someone asked me to play it. I loved it, but I did get monkey stomped. I think I came in last place by a mile. Great game. It belongs in the BGG Hall of Fame.
This has been a groundbreaking game because prior to this game, we were all playing games where we got to build empires, build civilizations, huge cities, and everything else. And in this game, you can make a ladder or a fishing rod. And it stripped down all of that epic building games that we have down to you're just running a farm in the Middle Ages and you're trying to grow some crops and maybe feed some sheep and things like that. But this put farming games on the map. There were probably farming games before this, but this is the one that made them very, very popular. It is still a very good game. It is still a classic, and this game has done a huge amount for the hobby. Uwe Rosenberg did design games before this, but this is the one that absolutely put him on the map.
It's Agricola, Jay. It's Agricola. They're all wrong. It's Agricola. Let's just agree on that now, please, please. But Agricola definitely deserves to be in the BGG Hall of Fame because there was that time where everyone played Agricola all the time. And I had never seen a Euro game sweep across the states like Agricola did. Uwe Rosenberg is now a household name for gamers the world over because of Agricola. Only for them years later to be like, oh yeah, he did Bonanza? But for the first time ever, we weren't going off into battles. We weren't trading in the Mediterranean. We were all farmers making the best farm possible. And oh my gosh, we all loved it. Loved it. This is a game that has caused countless debates between Caverna versus Agricola, versus feeding your workers versus not feeding your workers. Is baking bread really an important option? Animal husbandry, what does that mean? These are all things that came out of the love of Agricola, and seeing the love for this game on BGG has been mind-blowing and thoroughly enjoyed over the years. And then when I realized that Agricola truly is one of the first successful sandbox games. You can do whatever you want. Raise animals, bake bread, let other families starve. Agricola has influenced and inspired countless designers over the years and remains today a timeless classic.
Martin Wallace's Brass is an involved economic and route-building game set during the early days of the Industrial Revolution in Britain's Lancashire County. You're an entrepreneur who wants to use technology to make money, and during the game, players will construct cotton mills, ports, coal mines, ironworks, and shipyards. But construction is only the first step. You also need canals and railroads to connect energy sources to industries, and industries to sales locations. Complicating all of this is your constant need for money, which will lead to loans as you try to permanently boost income. Brass has inspired other game designs, including Brass Birmingham, which became the #1 game on BGG in 2023. And that's why Brass has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Brass is one of my absolute favorite economic strategy games of all time, and Brass puts you in Industrial Revolution England in the 1800s, in which you are going to be trying to compete with your opponents to build out various industries throughout the different cities in England and try to connect them via either canals or railways, depending on which era you're in. The fact that there are two separate eras really forces you to kind of change your strategy on the fly with the cards that you have in your hand, so that way you can try to put the best buildings out at the right time in the most opportune moments, so that you can both increase the amount of points you're going to score, but of course also try to increase your income, which will allow you to take more actions that are more meaningful in the later part of the game. The other part of the game that I really enjoy is the closed economy of the different resources that are in the game, namely the coal and the iron. The timing as to when you put out a certain industry at what cost, and how are you going to get your industry to flip so that it can score you points as well as your income, becomes very, very tight and tense. Sometimes you can place out an industry that will either help or hurt your opponents in a certain way in that kind of competitive Euro style game. So timing in this game is of the utmost importance as to when you can get yourself into a position that'll be strategic for yourself. The last part of the game that I really, really enjoy is the tight economy of the actual money in the game. How much money you spend in a given turn dictates what turn order you're going to be in. And so if you can time it just right and take a turn where you're paying the least amount of money, you'll be the first to go on the very next turn. So sometimes you can go back to back, and that can be critical and huge at pivotal moments of the game when you really want to go first, going into the very next turn when you have an opportunity. So all in all, I really enjoy Brass. If you've never played it before, I highly recommend it.
I think Brass is really important to the hobby and why I love it so much. It's the best example of a hand management system that is really accessible to all kinds of players. It's certainly a great economical gaming experience, and I love breaking out poker chips. But I think that Brass, for me, it's really special because I love it at 4 players. The system is really tight, and particularly with Lancashire, it's brutal near the end of that game. It's probably the purest example I have in my collection of multi-use cards. Every time I get a new hand of cards, I look at those 8 cards and I say, what am I going to do to burn one of these cards to take an action to either take a loan or develop the tiles on my mat or to build an industry somewhere on the board. The toughest decisions of a game maybe that I have when it comes to hand management mechanics. And so as a tool and introduction to other kinds of games like it, I love using Brass for that. I'm also so impressed that the game only has 1 map, and that map continues to be interesting. A lot of games now, when they have route building built into it, they have like a new map that comes out every year. Brass has 1 map, and that map still works, which is crazy to me. So I'll break out Brass anytime I can. Again, I prefer Lancashire, but I'll play any of them. One of the few games that I can really get into and deliver on a 2-hour experience that really is just a roller coaster of highs and lows.
Martin Wallace's Brass is an amazing game that really challenged the concept of resources. That you made a building that had resources available, but they were not yours anymore. Anyone could take them. And this is truly the first time that I've seen this mechanism in the game like this.
And we played Brass for the first time at a con, and I loved it. We played the old version, looking like it does, and I fell in love. And I was like, I need to get this game. And I got home. And the next day, the Kickstarter for this and Brass Birmingham, which both are 2 of my favorite games of all time, just appeared. The day after we get home. And just felt amazing. I was like, oh, this is just like the best coincidence ever. And these 2 games might be like together the most played games we have of a game of this weight. I love this. I love Brass Birmingham. And I would love a 3rd game in this series as well. That would make me happy, because these are fantastic games.
Is there anything that hasn't been said about Brass? The 2007 Martin Wallace masterpiece is possibly the cleanest, sharpest, most all-around perfect shared incentives game in the hobby. Many have tried to copy its template, but none have been able to capture Brass's special sauce. The magic lies in Brass's economy, which can seem impenetrable at first. A Eurogamer like me may try to control all the aspects of the game's supply chain, like maybe I'll build a mill to make cotton, but also build a port to buy the cotton off myself. Yeah, that's not gonna work out. Because the key is not to build a port after you've built your own mill, it's to build the port after someone else builds a mill. The game really wants you to anticipate and react to everyone else's needs. And the moment you realize this essential truth about Brass is the moment the game explodes with rich possibilities. It becomes an economic game of chess that's so addictive and so fun. And honestly, it has a pretty small rule set too. When I dove into the hobby in 2014, Brass was already a mainstay in the top 15 games of all time. But as flashier titles hit the marketplace, Brass's quaint art style kind of fell out of step with the hobby, and by 2018 it had dropped to its lowest rank since it was first published. Luckily, Roxley revamped Brass's entire look with a dark, brooding, and honestly iconic visual overhaul. This thrust Brass onto the radar of a new generation of gamers who immediately fell in love with the Brass system, so much so that its sister game, Brass Birmingham, took over the #1 spot on the BGG charts. The game's renaissance is a fun story, but it's a significant one too. It's a reminder that Brass is not just an achievement of game design, but a testament to the power of theme and art direction too. These things matter and can elevate an exceptional game to a timeless one. From its presentation, to its gameplay, to its depth, to its influence on the industry, Brass is exactly what you want in a Hall of Fame game. Its art style may be full of soot and stains, but trust me, Brass is truly flawless.
Tom Lehman's Race for the Galaxy is a deep interactive card game. Each round, players simultaneously choose an action. Everyone can take the actions chosen, and whoever picked an action gets a better version of it. Cards in hand are resources that you can spend to put other cards in play, whereas cards on planets are trade goods you can sell for more cards as you strive for high-value cards, military conquest, and points from produced goods. With its multiple expansions and board game adaptations, Race for the Galaxy has proven to be one of the richest, most replayable designs in the card and board game canon. And that's why Race for the Galaxy has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Race for the Galaxy was released in 2007, where players use cards to trade, consume, produce, develop their own colonies. It is probably the first engine building game that I played, and I really fell in love with it the first time I played it. The thing that I really like about this game is, first of all, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I really like the cheesy artwork for it. It's a bit old school, but I really like the style. The other thing that I think that is quite cool is the turn activation or action selection system, you could say, that I think is very smart, where each player chooses a different card and they are going to be able to execute an action with a bonus if they pick the card, and the other players are going to be able to follow suit. It is very well made. It really made me fall in love with those kind of engine building games where you're trying to build interesting synergies. And there is one thing that people don't really like too much about that game, and that's the symbology. And personally, I think the symbology part is actually quite fun. Yes, it is a bit much, and in a way you could say that it's almost like learning another language, and you could see it as learning an alien language, and I think that's what's pretty cool about it.
Race for the Galaxy. As you can tell from my well-worn signed copy, this is one that is near and dear to my heart. It came out in 2007 when I was just getting into hobby board games, and I remember in my summer job as a lifeguard, I taught it to as many of the other lifeguards as I could, so that when our rotations lined up, we could play Race for the Galaxy in 10-minute increments all summer. It was a beast to teach, with scores of unique cards and icons that were like learning a language, but it was worth it because it was so fresh and so fun and so replayable. I haven't fact-checked this, but in my mind, Race to the Galaxy really created the tableau building card game genre as we know it. And it's aged incredibly well. I love Wingspan and 51st State, and I think Race for the Galaxy stacks up great against those and many others. And in some ways, it was ahead of its time. Like what I was talking about it being a beast to teach, I'm not sure that's even true anymore. I think when you sit down people who have played a few board games before with Race for the Galaxy now, they'll just look at it and be like, okay, 2 types of cards, 5 phases, and a reference sheet of symbols. Got it. Let's go. It's easier than it's ever been. So this is one that's been regularly hitting my table for 17 years, and I'm confident it'll be here for another 17.
When Race for the Galaxy came out in 2007, it changed my whole gaming experience. The depth of this little 30-minute spacefaring game made me want to play it over and over again, and every game was different. I owe my love of engine building and probably my love of complicated combos to Race for the Galaxy. To this day, my favorite way to win is to pull off a successful military strategy. But one of the many reasons I think it's a great game, and the reason I think Race for the Galaxy is so significant in our hobby, is absolutely the iconography. It's one of the first things you notice when you open the box. Each of the phases, the card types, even how you earn your victory points have their own symbols. This iconography really helped me break down and understand each mechanic of the game and made it easier to identify complicated strategies. Not to mention I can pick up an expansion or spin-off and almost instantly know how to play. Most games use iconography to simplify their rule sets, but now our hobby is full of games that are language independent, which wouldn't be possible without extensive iconography. Honestly, I think Race for the Galaxy paved the way.
Magic the Gathering launched the trading card genre, with players building a personalized deck for each game. Donald X. Vaccarino's Dominion transformed deck building into a game of its own. Starting with only a handful of copper, players buy action cards and more valuable money cards turn by turn to work their way up to buying valuable point cards. The Dominion game system is incredibly versatile, with 25 different action cards in the base game, only 10 of which are in play. Changing even one action affects the feel of the game, and hundreds of actions are available across more than a dozen expansions. Hundreds of deck building games have been released in the wake of Dominion's success, and that's why Dominion has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Dominion. Dominion. Dominion! Dominion is the definitive deck builder, the popularizer of the genre, and one of the most important entrants into the BGG Hall of Fame. In Dominion, players take the role of provincial leaders, all trying to build the most impressive domain. Each player begins the game with a starting deck of 10 low-value cards, representing the beginning of their fledgling province. A few estates and just some measly copper, but on their turns, players will use those cards to purchase better, more valuable cards from a shared market in the middle of the table. As players acquire new and different cards, they add them to their personal deck, which increase in size and power. If they can construct an efficient method of generating wealth and actions, they'll be able to purchase the highest point value cards and win the game. At least 10 of the top 50 games on the BGG list fall into the deck building category, or dice building or pool building. They're very similar in principle. But none of those games are Dominion, which is understandable, as many of the higher ranking games took the building blocks provided by the base game of Dominion here and created something even more dynamic. But Dominion is nothing if not dynamic. As of this recording, Dominion is now in its second edition with improved and streamlined cards and has 16 expansions, all of which contain many new kingdom cards and cards which exist beyond the kingdom, like events, landmarks, prophecies, and more. Because new cards are interchangeable with other cards in the base game and expansions, each game of Dominion can have wildly different markets to choose from, requiring players to adapt their strategies and their deck building. Dominion's spot in the Hall of Fame is kind of a foregone conclusion. In fact, once BGG establishes a physical Hall of Fame, I kind of expect Dominion to have its own wing, maybe even a statue of Signore Vaccarino, and like an eternal flame outside where people permanently trash their coppers. I personally love this game so much. I even brought in my old first edition big box here. I didn't even sleeve the cards. That's how new I was to modern gaming when I started playing Dominion. I mean, look at the bend on this village here. Look at this. Yeah, that's like well loved. That's well played. In any case, congrats to Dominion on your inevitable accolades, and congrats to you, dear watcher, for learning about the most important deck builder in the known universe.
So Dominion, it is deck building, right? They are synonymous. I came in at a strange point where my first ever deck building game was A Few Acres of Snow, which is very strange. It's a very strange place to come into to that genre. And so it wasn't until years later that I actually went back and played Dominion. So it was interesting coming at it from that perspective, which is opposite for most people. But when I played it that first time, it sort of gave me a new appreciation for its purity and why it was the genre creator that it was. It is still as important today as it ever was. because as a designer, I can go back to it today and still find lessons. I can still find informative gameplay, just in the way it was when it was first designed. And of course, the most important thing probably is the purity of Dominion, right? So we see so many games now that use deck building as just one component, and that's great. But it's still important to have the purity of the genre creator when we go back and we understand where the design influences came from.
I'm not sure there's a game of this era which has had such an impact on a hobby. Deck building went from the entire basis of a game to something that was so well entrenched that you couldn't completely base a game on deck building. You can only now use it as a sub part of a game. And I don't think there's anything else that can really profess to say that it's had that impact.
I totally agree. And Dominion is, I think, pretty much is the starting of my board game library. This is how I discover where to buy games from, how to buy it online, on the store, on sale, Amazon, or whatever. No, there was no Amazon back then, sorry. Somewhere online. And we're still playing it to this day. They keep bringing on new expansions and then add new mechanics to it, which is really fun.
So Dominion, that was a game that means a lot to me as both a designer, but just getting into really playing games. When I first started learning about the hobby industry, I was told to go on like a meetup.com, find local groups in the Chicago area. First group I find was only 20 minutes away. When I showed up, they were gatekeeping, and they were using terminology that I did not understand because I didn't know what game mechanics were before I found the BGG page. And so they were trying to teach me some Japanime deck builder, and by teach me, I mean they didn't teach me and they handed me a deck of cards instead to play like spades or something. And so instead of this making me not want to try to learn games, it instead did the opposite, and thanks to my friend Ryan, told me how to find the mechanics on the BGG page. I made index cards, so I actually wrote out definitions of all these, including deck building, which was the first thing it told me to look at was Dominion. So that became my first deck building game I ever played. It also has now become one of my favorite mechanics and was the thing that made me learn all the mechanics and come back and say, sorry, I now know all these words and I can now start designing those things. So I appreciate Dominion for that reason. And it's just being a great game mechanic that just kind of like kicked off everyone else.
Matt Leacock's Pandemic wasn't the first cooperative game on the market, but it quickly became the benchmark to which all other cooperative games are compared. Players work together to find cures for 4 diseases that have sprung up around the world. Everyone has a unique ability and a role to play, with a combination of powers having a very different feel. Diseases spread both gradually and suddenly, with players being able to use knowledge of past outbreaks to guess where they're needed most, whether they need to keep a disease in check, to establish research stations, or to share information to create a cure. The Pandemic system has made its way into multiple spin-off titles while also inspiring countless other designers. And that's why Pandemic has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
This game is so important to the industry and to me personally. It completely changed the direction, the course of the industry by making co-op cool. Before Pandemic came along, you had a few games, a couple of standouts to be sure, but nothing that had really hit the zeitgeist. But the combination of thematic storytelling that was part of this and the brilliant puzzly gameplay that was all about being able to predict chaos and put you in the role not of soldiers or orc slayers. We're not trying to throw a ring into Mount Doom. We're not trying to colonize alien planets. We are just men and women, regular people, scientists, first responders out there doing our best to help our fellow man. This game tells an important story that is as relevant today as it was when it came out over a decade ago. And the gameplay and the story it tells continues to resonate. We've had so many variations. Doesn't matter whether you want straight Pandemic, if you want fantasy Pandemic, if you want historical Pandemic, if you want spy versus spy Pandemic. There are so many different variations on it now because the core system is so clean and pure and elegant and wonderful. Now, I said it changed the industry. I think that's undeniable. This game completely opened my eyes to the world of modern board gaming. And it wasn't too long after this that I quit my job as a video game designer, which I'd been doing for 2 decades, and wanted to devote more time to board gaming, which is now my wife's and my #1 passion. It's completely put me on a new career trajectory. It has changed my wife's and my life, and the lives of all our family too. And I have said this to designer Matt Leacock before in person, but I am going to say it to everybody in the world. Matt and Zeph Schlesinger and everybody at Z-Man, everybody who has had a hand in the development of this in all the different permutations. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. You have made my life so much better. And so I am tickled pink to be one of, I'm sure, many voices singing this game's praises as it works its way so rightfully into the Hall of Fame. It's one of the all-time greats. It's tough to beat. It's my #1 game of all time. It has given me my greatest gaming sessions of all time. Specifically Pandemic Legacy Season 1. Oh my gosh, don't even get me started on that. I love it. Pandemic.
I am a huge fan of cooperative games. Pandemic was the first one that I had played and kind of kicked off just like my wanting to learn how to design these kinds of games, especially trying to figure out like how do you win or lose, how do you scale the difficulty. And the reason I like co-op games so much is because it has helped me bring non-gamers into gaming. Because there is like a winner, but we either win as a group or we lose as a group. And there is like that competitive nature, but it's really cool because like you can help someone out without necessarily quarterbacking, but also not making them feel dumb because they don't understand like a mechanic or something. So I find that really powerful in co-ops. And it's like really motivated me to make more and more of them to try to bring more people in the industry. It really just started to push people towards, hey, maybe we have this alternative. Maybe we win together versus like, I beat you, you beat me, we have a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th place, whatever. But yeah, so I'm a huge fan of Pandemic.
Pandemic was really spreading like a wildfire when it was first out. And that's what I think is a game that really brings something to board gaming.
I think for me, the legacy of the legacy of Pandemic as a game, to me, it's the earliest game that really kind of perfected the escalation mechanism in cooperative gaming in a very simple way. So obviously there'd been the Forbidden games before that, but I think what Pandemic did with reshuffling only the deck and putting it back on top, the way that forces the game to escalate, but also makes it fairly predictable. To be honest, for a cooperative game of that level, I don't think anyone's improved on that. We're 15 years on. And I think that's what made it such a successful game and continues to make it such a great game.
The first cooperative game I played was Pandemic. And I also learned how to play with certain people and not with certain people, potentially for the alpha playerness. And that's what it means to us.
Modern times, you know, in the 2000s, I'd say it's like this right up there with like CATAN and Carcassone and the rest has created so many board gamers.
It really has created so many board gamers, and this is one of the few games that's really hit into the mainstream. A lot of people, if they don't play any board games, they at least know that Pandemic exists. It's also one of the, it's not obviously not the first cooperative game, but I feel like it was one of the first like really kind of mass marketing cooperative games, and it is the game that got us into the hobby.
Yeah, so that's why it's kind of special for us. This was the first time we were playing with a family that like souped up their little bits and stuff, and so it was like super thematic and like it was just like the coolest thing I'd ever seen because I had never played like a modern board game at that point, and I was like, what's going on? This is so cool. We're saving the world. And I feel like a lot of people get that big first experience. Again, for us, our story is not unique in this, and Pandemic has just made so many board gamers that like it just has to be in this kind of pantheon of greatness forevermore. And it still, honestly, all these years later, is amazing.
That's right, and that's Pandemic.
Antoine Balza's Seven Wonders is yet another take on a civilization game, with each player starting with the blueprints for a wonder they can build, as well as a hand of Age 1 cards. Each turn, everyone simultaneously chooses a card, passes the rest to their neighbor, then plays their card or discards it for money. Cards come in 7 types, and as you progress through 3 ages, you somewhat abstractly develop your infrastructure, battle neighbors, build on past discoveries, and construct your wonder. Each card you choose to take leaves opportunities for your opponents. And with 7 Wonders allowing for up to 7 players while playing in less than an hour, it became a runaway hit and swept awards around the world. And that's why Seven Wonders has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I think that Seven Wonders is pretty significant in the board game hobby for a few different reasons. One being that I feel like Seven Wonders made drafting, and especially closed drafting, more of a well-known mechanism within board games. I do know that drafting and like closed drafting, pick and pass drafts were more of a thing with Magic the Gathering, but it wasn't really known as much in board games. So with Seven Wonders featuring this closed drafting mechanism, it made it so that more and more board games since then have come out with that closed drafting mechanism. And then another thing is that I feel like the gameplay of Seven Wonders is just made for such a wide variety of people. Personally, Seven Wonders has been a game that was my stepping stone into board games. I've played Seven Wonders with family members that aren't as experienced with board games. I've played Seven Wonders with other people that are really into the board game hobby as well, and it just really shows that a simple rule set game that has a lot of strategic depth are the types of games that are really going to stick around and make a difference in the board game hobby. Also, it being a game that can play up to 7 players, it's always that game that I've played with big groups that still allows you to play a like strategic, more board gamey game with others.
This game is extraordinary. It has brought card drafting, the mechanism, to a whole new level. It made it so easy and breezy, and the game is so quick, and it really feels like you're building out your civilization. And that is something that is really important about this game. This is one of the earliest Euro-style games that actually incorporated theme into the game, and not a whole lot of games were doing it at that point. This is one of my all-time favorite games, and this is also one of my wife's all-time favorite games as well. We love playing this one, so that is the Hall of Fame Seven Wonders Board Game Geek. Amazing!
Seven Wonders is, and will probably always be, a staple of the board gaming hobby. It's been here for a long time, and I think it's gonna stay forever. Seven Wonders took drafting of cards, where I have a hand of cards, I'm gonna pick one, I'm gonna send it to the next player, and made it the whole game. It made it so that it was easy to play all the way up to 7 people, because I only interacted with the 2 people on both of my sides, and it was, and it is, a fantastic game.
And what's so wonderful about this game is that anyone can play it. I think this is a game that we for the longest time brought with us to people that we wanted to introduce to board games, and it does it in a wonderful way with like the repetitiveness of the actions, but the tenseness of what card should I get and what is coming to me next.
There are very few games that actually combine the mechanics of closed drafting, hand management, set collection, and variable player powers together in such an elegant manner. It is done so beautifully that it comes together as a 30-minute game, easily scaling to 7 players without materially affecting the game length. The combination of brilliant mechanics and game length places this game easily into the BGG Hall of Fame and cemented Anton Bauza as one of the great designers of our time.
For years, designer Stefan Feld was synonymous with Alea, a German strategy game brand launched in 1999 with Ra. The most popular of his 7 Alea titles is the Castles of Burgundy, in which players build a princedom 1 tile at a time. Each turn, players roll 2 dice, then use them to draft tiles into their reserve, place them on their board, and deliver goods. This design is an ideal example of a point salad game in which you want to make as much as you can out of each tiny actions so that you can fill areas on your board, acquire goods, gain coins, take bonus actions, and grab bonus buildings that work with your strategy. The Castles of Burgundy popularized the point salad genre, which is now common in the game industry. And that's why the Castles of Burgundy has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Today, I'm here to induct into the BGG Hall of Fame that game. And Castles of Burgundy is that game. It's also that game that's designed by a designer that makes you want to play all of that designer's games. It's that game that got countless people into the hobby. The other thing is that Castles of Burgundy transformed my wife from someone who dabbles into board gaming to a monster at the table, which has made gaming for me both a joy and beautifully brutal.
Castles of Burgundy is one of my favorite games. I still play it all the time, 2-player with my spouse. I remember it most fondly as the game that blew my mind because no matter what you roll on the dice, each number is pretty equivalent to the others. They definitely have specific outcomes, but a 6 isn't necessarily better than a 1. That was really the first game that I had seen that does that. As a designer, I really appreciate how the dice in Castles of Burgundy limits the number of options that are available on your turn to just a couple spots on the board, so you don't have to be processing everything on every turn. And I think that that's actually just a really nice way to reduce the cognitive load, as we call it. Stefan Feld, I think of as a designer who has these beautiful interlocking systems all layered on top of each other. And I find Castles of Burgundy one of his most manageable designs.
The Castles of Burgundy is a shining example of how satisfying the simplest game mechanisms can be. Roll dice, take tiles, place tiles. That's it. But the puzzle that creates, for me, is absolutely addicting. I think this game is important to the hobby because you can take it to new players and say, hey, you don't have to spend your precious brain energy on learning a whole bunch of complicated rules. Instead, take that energy and focus it on the delicious meal of efficiently applying those rules. And on learning what all the different tiles do. But you've got this. Welcome to your new obsession. Also, since it has dice in it, it definitely counts as Ameritrash, so.
It was 2015, maybe 2016, and I was fresh out of college. My friend invited me over for a board game. And it was called the Castles of Burgundy. There was a lot of beige on the table. I mean, there was some dice. They had 6 sides. I mean, that was something, but I didn't know anything about board games. But because of that evening, I fell in love with board games. Throughout the following years, the Castles of Burgundy remained on my top 9 most played games and favorite board games of all time. In 2019, they came out with a new edition, and in 2022, they came out with this edition. I upgraded and got everything I could for it. I've been able to teach this game to so many people, new and experienced board gamers. This game is so approachable, and it shows you how to use strategy to not only have fun, but also claim a win. The BGG Hall of Fame should have a ranking, and this one should be number 1.
The Castles of Burgundy erupted into the board game scene in 2011, being a huge hit from Stefan Feld. This game gave you possibilities to build up different combinations of cool tiles, but what this game did best was giving 2 players a fantastic experience.
And the reason we love this game so much is that it was one of the first real hobby board games that we enjoyed playing together, and therefore it has been with us since the beginning of our board game career, and it has a special place in our hearts. Thank you, Stefan Feld, for making this amazing game.
And it will always be here for us.
I feel like the Castles of Burgundy really changed the game with tile placement. Stefan Feld took that tile placement mechanism and brought it into more of a Euro style game. Every single time you're placing one of these tiles, you are getting victory points in different ways, or pretty much every time you're placing down a tile. I will say right now that the Castles of Burgundy is currently my favorite game of all time and has really made quite the impact on the board game hobby.
The Castles of Burgundy is my favorite game of all time. But what is it about the Castles of Burgundy that makes it so special? I wish I knew, because I would make a game and sell it to lots of people. It's simple to understand, it's satisfying to play, and everything you do in that game leads you to a point of having fun. And it makes you feel smart. And it makes you hate the people around the table just a little bit when they take something that you want, but it just brings so much laughter and joy and happiness into the homes of so many people. And certainly for me, I can't ever see the Castle of Burgundy leaving my #1 spot. There's just perfection in that box.
Terra Mystica demonstrates that you can have a high conflict, high interaction game without combat or casualties. Each player in this luck-free design by Jan Strogmüller and Helge Ostertag takes one of 14 factions, each with unique abilities and each calling one of the 7 types of landscape home. Players use workers, money, and priests to build dwellings, temples, trading houses, and strongholds. You can build only on your home turf, which often requires you to terraform land that opponents might also want. You also have power as a resource that cycles into different bowls on your player board for a unique take on resource management. In addition to spawning 2 game series, Gaia Project and Age of Innovation, Terra Mystica remains a favorite of competitive board gamers and a classic of refined design. And that's why Terra Mystica has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you. I was just looking for one of my favorite games. Here it is, Terra Mystica. This 2012 game by Helge Ostertag and Jens Strogmüller and Feuerland is just an amazing classic game that deserves to be in the BGG Hall of Fame. Here it is, set up on the table. Looks pretty intimidating, doesn't it? But interestingly, really easy to learn, snappy turns. Terra Mystica did some of the foundational elements of modern board gaming earlier and better than a lot of other games. They had asymmetric player powers. They had rewards underneath pieces when you put them on the board. Complex area control. Really one of my favorites. Terra Mystica, 2012, Helge Ostertag and Jens Strogmüller and Feuerland Spiel. Really a fantastic Hall of Fame game.
Hi everybody, I'm Starla.
I'm Mick.
And we are Our Family Plays Games.
Yeah!
And we want to share a little bit about a game called Terra Mystica, which is in the BGG Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, it's a heavy one.
It's heavy.
It's heavy.
Now Terra Mystica is a Euro-style game, and you've got these different factions that you can get and play. And you know, the first time we saw Terra Mystica, I was afraid of that game.
Yes, it hurt our head.
It gave me a literal headache.
But what I think was so significant about it, you have this heavy game, which is no one gets eliminated.
No.
And that's that Euro style. No one gets eliminated, and you're fighting to the end. Trying to get points, majorities, and, you know, just doing all these Euro type things, you know, in this game.
Yes, and you're terraforming some of the landscape for your faction.
Yes.
What's going to be beneficial to your faction.
And trying to get enough resources in order to do it, because it's hard to get resources.
It is very
hard. So you really have to maneuver and strategize in order to get resources.
Yes, and I know the first time we saw it, I was like, I don't know if I can play this game, because we were new to the hobby.
Yes, we were very
new. I was like, I don't know if I can play this, because this is a game that was so different from anything I'd known before.
Yes.
You know, even though we had played other games at that point, this one scared me.
Yeah, this was our first heavy game.
Like I said, when we first played it, it gave me a headache. I was a little afraid of it, but it challenged me. It's like, okay, this game is not going to beat me.
No.
And then once I got that in my mind, I just fell in love with it. I absolutely love playing this game.
We played the stuff out of this game. I tell you, we love Terra Mystica. Yes, it's really special because it showed us that we could play heavy games. And now we could strategize, and now we do that.
And then having these factions, that was something new to us too.
Factions.
Having these different factions, you know.
With different powers.
Yes. You know, even though, you know, the game kind of weights it off so everybody can kind of be equal, but you have different powers and different factions, and you got to learn how to play it.
Yes, you do.
From that particular faction.
Yes, you do. And how factions kind of go against each other, and sometimes some run over some factions. Because I got ran over a lot, family. I got ran over a lot. Yes. By her. Yes.
But Terra Mystica is a fun game.
Yes.
I would recommend it for anyone who loves a challenge.
A big challenge.
Especially if you've never played it before.
Yes.
To give it a shot. Wonderful game. It deserves a place in the BGG Hall of Fame, and I'm so happy it's there.
I'm very happy too.
I love Terra Mystica. I really, really love Terra Mystica. It's one of my most played games, probably my most played heavy game of all time. It's one that I discovered at Geekway to the West way back in, I think, 2013. When I saw it played on a lot of tables, I was a little intimidated by it, but I'm so glad I played it because it had a huge impact on me as a designer in a number of different ways. Probably the biggest way being the idea that the mats in Terra Mystica are covered with tokens at the beginning of the game, and throughout the game you remove those tokens, place them on the board, and get better and better income benefits. This influenced a few of my games, notably Scythe. It had a really big impact on the design of Scythe. I also feel that Terra Mystica has had a rather large impact on the hobby as a whole, because I think it's one of the first strongly asymmetric Euro games. Games with high agency like Terra Mystica, but with a lot of asymmetry. And I love that about the game. I love that it has influenced the asymmetric Euro game side of the hobby in such a big way in the 10 years that followed Terra Mystica's release. So yeah, I'm forever grateful as a designer and as a gamer for Terra Mystica, and I think it's had a wonderful impact on the gaming hobby as a whole.
Matt Gert's Concordia does so much with so little. With a long-term goal of building trade routes across the Roman Empire, you start with only 2 figures in Rome and a hand of 7 action cards. On a turn, you play a card to earn coins, move, build production houses, produce, buy and trade resources, copy another player's action, buy a new card, or get all your cards back while putting more figures on the board. This card system defines which actions you can perform, as well as how you score at the end of the game, since each card corresponds to a Roman god who scores in a unique way. Concordia's simple but engaging design shows that complex play doesn't require complicated rules. And that's why Concordia has been inducted into the BoardGameGeek Hall of Fame for 2025.
I love Concordia. Right from my very first play, I knew this was something special. The game itself is elegant, but it has a great decision space within what you do on your turn. It's really simple. You have a hand of cards and you play one of them. You do what the card says, and then the next person goes. Some of those cards let you buy new cards, adding them into your hand, which increases the options that you have. And I love the simplicity of that. Each individual action is quite easy to teach. Now, one big part of the game involves a shared decision space where you need resources to construct on the board and do a lot of things, but when you make resources, you generally also give resources to your opponents. So you have to weigh how good it is for you based off of your opponents and, figuring out who you're going to help. Also, every time you buy a card, it is dictating all of the points that you're going to be getting at the very end of the game. So you have to weigh what action do you want and where you want to get the points in a really delicate balance. Now, when you bring all of these elements together, you have an absolute classic and one that's left a significant mark on the games that have come out after.
So Concordia has been a game that has been in my top games for a very long time. There's just something about Concordia and the just simple rule set that I just really enjoy teaching Concordia. And it's really as simple as you have the cards in Concordia and those are the rules there. And then I haven't even touched on the final game scoring for Concordia. I feel like there has still to this day not been another game that has this amazing reveal of final scoring. Basically, all of the cards that you have purchased throughout the game, you are going to then sprawl out, and then those cards that you've collected in the different sets are then going to be the multipliers for your end game objectives, which I think is just so cool. And again, not really seen often in games. So yeah, all of these things combined has really made Concordia a game that has stood out and has really been significant in the board game hobby.
Concordia is the purest form of board game there is. Like, take an example of a board game and it will describe Concordia, trading in the Mediterranean.
Yes.
But it is so much more than that. The card play is the work of a genius. The micro turns, it's just like so classic, and Concordia has then become one of the classics that we turn to again and again.
This is one of those games that the more I play it, the more I can just think about my turns like 6, 7, 8, 9 turns ahead. This is one of those games that feels like chess to me, because I would be like, oh, I'm going to do this, and of course somebody's going to change it and go in and build where I want to build. But other than that, this is one of those where I just enjoy myself. It's one of those Zen board games. It has moments of interaction and tenseness, but it's just like that right weight that makes it feel amazing for me.
Concordia is maybe the Swiss Army knife of my collection. It has a number of different maps. I have the Venus edition, and if you want to play in teams, play Venus. You want to play with 2 or 3 players, use the smaller maps. It plays great at 6 players. I don't really have any other great 6-player strategy games, and Concordia is that. Maybe the best thing about the game, the rule book is 4 pages long. That you can get a game of this quality and this depth that has a 4-page rule book is crazy to me. So it feels timeless, both when I first played it and as recently as last year.
Concordia is the rare and special game that is completely accessible to new gamers and deep enough for seasoned veterans. And with a lean set of rules, about 4 pages total, it generates layers of strategy that players are still picking apart a decade later. Tempo, I learned, is key in Concordia. Knowing when to expand, when to gather resources, when to sell, when to buy. It's a perilous balance with no perfect path forward. Concordia feels like an instant classic. It's that Concordia feels like something that's been with us for decades, that it can be played with anyone and lead to an infinite number of outcomes, that the system is ever expanding with new maps and modules being released all the time, that it distills everything we love about gaming into one tight package. Concordia is a masterclass in doing more with less, a reminder that clean design is sometimes all we need. Not all games age well, and Concordia doesn't coast on nostalgia. It holds up just as well today as it did in 2013, maybe even better. Concordia is peak elegance, a collection essential, and the pinnacle of the Euro game genre.
Thank you to all of the contributors who helped make this video, and thank you for joining us in celebrating these incredible games and designers who have shaped the hobby we love. For more details and to explore even more amazing games, visit BoardGameGeek.com.